This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Whisper Room, and Eventide. So get ready to rock.
One morning I had the idea of, I thought, okay, well, I'm starting to get more recording work. I've still got some time, so maybe I could start a podcast. And so I thought, okay, who would be my dream guests? And I thought first, okay, Steve Albini is probably my favorite recording engineer. I'll ask him if he'll do it. He's open about being easy to contact. So I contacted him about it. And a few hours later, he got back to me saying, yeah, I'll do your podcast. It was honestly less than 24 hours between having the idea and having the first guest.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. If you're sick of bothering the neighbors when you are trying to record your music or ruining your recordings with outside noises, but you're not ready to spend a ton of money on permanent studio construction yet, then consider getting a Whisper Room ISO booth for your studio. Whisper Room offers the instant solution for a comfortable, quiet, ventilated, portable ISO booth with easy line of sight for recording vocals, guitar amps, or even drums. Get 10% off the 4x4 or 4x6 booth when you mention Recording Studio Rockstars. Go to whisperroom.com or click the link in the show notes below. What do Michael Brower, Joe Chiccarelli, Mike Gazowski, Dave Pensato, and George Massenberg all have in common? They all have great things to say about Eventide. Originating in a New York City basement in 1971 with the original Instant Phaser and H910 harmonizer, Eventide continues to transform the sound of music with the iconic H9000 harmonizer, visionary guitar effects like the H9 pedal, and now a whole suite of incredible plugins for your studio. Go to eventide.com to learn more or click the link in the show notes below. This episode is sponsored by OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, your trusted source for memory and speed upgrades, DIY installs, and used Macs for your studio. Let OWC focus on keeping your studio Mac in killer condition so that you can focus on making great music. Why ditch your existing Mac when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and learn how you can supercharge your studio Mac. The speed to create, the capacity to dream. Find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw. Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Hamish Benjamin, a recording engineer and producer from England, as well as the host of a very cool podcast, new podcast called Somewhere Sound, where he interviews great producers and engineers from around the world. Hamish is also the youngest guest to be on Recording Studio Rockstars at the tender age of 21. He started his podcast less than a year ago, yet he already has a who's who list of incredible guests, including Mark Howard, Larry Crane, Joe Chiccarelli, Steve Albini, Butch Vig, Vance Powell, and Eric Valentine, just to name a few. As an engineer himself, he runs a portable recording studio business, also called Somewhere Studios, recording mainly from a hall in the southeast of England. He specializes in recording bands live, playing together in one room, and fusing traditional recording techniques with the benefits of modern digital recording. So I'm excited to talk to Hamish today about what he has learned from his luminary podcast guests and from starting a studio business himself at such a young age. And maybe even it's a chance for me to remember what it was like to be 21 again. So please welcome Hamish Benjamin to Recording Studio Rockstars. Hamish, are you ready to rock, my man?
Most definitely.
Most definitely. Awesome, dude. So one of the things that I really enjoy about listening to your podcast is you are just so chill, man. You're the kind of podcast host that is like the least person we're going to hear about on the interview, and you leave just maximum space for your guests, unlike a talkative person like myself. So it's great to have you on the show and hear your nice voice.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to get as much out of the way as much as possible, to be honest. When you've got Steve Albini and Butch Vig in front of you, I don't really feel the need to impart my wisdom, whatever wisdom I have. very happy just to let them talk.
Well, that's wise. I mean, that is, I would say that at the age of 21, that's often a great age to be interning in a studio as well. And what you just described is what makes a perfect intern in the studio. Somebody wants to do more learning and listening than trying to express what they already know about recording at that time.
Yeah, I did some interning for a few years as well as kind of saving up my own equipment during that time. It's definitely valuable. Got to intern under John Leckie for a little bit, who did like Radiohead, The Bends, and Stone Roses and stuff like that.
Wow.
People don't know him. And that was great. Got to watch him mix the whole record, and got to go to Abbey Road with him as well, which was incredible, and definitely a very valuable experience.
Have you had him on the podcast yet? I didn't see his name on the list there yet.
No, I haven't yet. I need to get around to asking him.
Is that one of those things where it was like, it's harder for you to go invite somebody onto the show that you know so closely, and easier to go reach out to somebody you hadn't met before?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I haven't spoken to him for a few years. We just kind of working together type of thing, if you can call it that. But I've actually had I haven't really had many British guests on, surprisingly. I need to get a lot more, because a lot of it's obviously, as probably you get introduced to people through other people. So like through Mark Rubel, who's a Blackbird Academy, he's introduced me to a load of Nashville people. So like now the next 15 episodes are all going to be Nashville people. But
yeah, indeed. Apologies already. Mark, I forgot to give you a huge shout out in the intro. Thank you to you one more time for bringing on another great guest onto Recording Studio Rockstars. Mark is I'm trying to think of what's it called, where the trains all come together in the yard and they all turn around and get, redirected and reconnected. That's Mark Rubel in the recording world.
He's the nicest guy. So he's been so helpful and supportive of me.
Yeah. Are you going to have him on your show?
Yeah, I've already interviewed him. It just isn't out yet.
Right on, man. That's two people that are both very sort of like gentle sounding. And did you guys was it hard to keep going, or did you, was it no problem?
No, it was no problem, actually. He has a lot of kind of conceptual ideas too. So those can kind of go a long way. And we talked about a lot of stuff that wasn't just his career as well, like, because he's writing a book at the moment about the history of American recording studios. So we talked quite a bit about that and different studios and things like that. It's more of a kind of chatty one.
That's right. I remember hearing him mention that. That's really exciting. I bet it's going to be an incredible book.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, so let's see. Tell us a little bit more about yourself in your own words. And, how did you get started out in recording?
Like I've been playing music for a long time, and I guess slowly I got more into recording and kind of recording myself to start with, as most people do. And then I started I did a year at music college, kind of part-time, which obviously kind of gave me some good groundwork. And in that time, I started interning at other studios, and then kind of slowly saving up for my own equipment up until now, kind of 3-4 years later, where I've got full studio worth of equipment and just started my own business properly. And I'm doing the podcast too.
Wow. That's actually pretty impressive. I mean, 3 to 4 years. I think it took me longer than that to have much more than just a couple of pieces of gear. You seem very driven and very focused. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like you've had a real sense of what it is you want to do and you've been very focused in your direction?
I'd say so, definitely, considering my age. I mean, I'm quite obsessive in a way, not in a kind of negative way, but I know what I want to do and I kind of go and do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I have known I wanted to do this since about age 17 properly, I guess. And obviously, because I've still been living with my parents, I don't have to worry about paying bills and stuff. So working menial jobs, even if they are menial, is what led to being able to save up for all this equipment. So
that's great. And, I love to hear that story. So that window of time where you have an opportunity to like kind of either, live at home some more or get out of the house and do your own thing. Being able to live at home with your parents is an incredible opportunity and an incredible advantage in that time if you use it wisely like you're doing. And I imagine that, most parents out there are both pretty thrilled to have their kids sticking around a little longer, but very, very excited probably to see, their son sticking around and taking advantage of that, but clearly pursuing something of real value. So that's pretty exciting.
I think it's become clearer over time because obviously I didn't go to university. It's kind of what I did instead of university was just do boring jobs to save up for starting this business, which now it's all kind of come to fruition. So I think they're definitely very happy now when they can see it's actually all been worth it, because obviously a lot of parents will start with when you're like 18, you're working a boring job to save up for like a microphone that's £1,000. They're going to be like, well, you're spending £1,000 on a microphone? What? But then now they can see, okay, it's actually, I'm earning a living from this and I'm starting to get busier. And yeah, I think it's all right now.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. And hopefully this episode will be inspiring to other people who are, in similar age and time in their lives. I probably would have helped me out a lot to hear from you when I was at that age. I certainly didn't. I didn't even know what I wanted to do. I just did go off to college, studied something I wasn't interested in. I mean, I was interested, but I was more interested in recording music, and then had to kind of come back around and do that. And like you, once I sort of found my path in what I wanted to do with recording, I was able to really dig my heels in. Tell us about your studio that you've put together. What is it? What kind of gear are you putting together, and what's your mission?
Well, I've always been kind of wanting to not upgrade, if that makes sense. So instead of getting a bunch of like not great mics to start with, which you then have to kind of get rid of and upgrade when you want to do like quote unquote professional recording, I've always just tried to slowly save up for the best stuff I can. And it's all kind of also using modern kind of digital stuff as well as I can. So the most of it's based out of 2 rack units, which is, converters and loads of great preamps. Because in reality, you don't really need a desk. Those are the two the preamps are the core component that you really need to be like high quality. Because a lot of other stuff, obviously, you can do in the box.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got those rack units, and then just a load of like the best mics possible, like Coles and Royers and that sort of thing. And so hopefully making the best of older stuff like ribbon mics and classic mics and modern kind of digital recording, like good converters, and sort of just from my laptop, and slowly getting more stuff over time, like to bring to places like drum kits and guitar amps and stuff like that.
What's the first piece of gear you felt like you needed to buy?
I think I got my converters first, just because it felt like because it was like I can finally have like enough inputs to record a drum kit or something and get used to doing that. And I'm on the RME 5 Faces at the moment. I think that was the very first thing I got. Just I think it's partly because someone knew was selling one.
Yeah. So tell us. So the RME was more, something that seemed high quality, but it was just an opportunity to get one, or did you actually like do some research on converters and decide that was the highest quality?
And it was partly just opportunity. I mean, obviously, I would have definitely researched it and saw that it had good reviews and everything. And the person who I was buying it from was like a professional recording person, so I trusted them.
Right, and you're not exactly saving up for the Burl mothership just yet on
exactly
on a medial job.
One day I want to go to the kind of next level of converters, but I'm very happy with where I am now.
Yeah. Okay, and then
a lot of the stuff has been like opportunity in terms of, because when I started out, I thought I'm never going to be able to buy a pair of Royers because that's a lot of money. But then suddenly some come up much, much cheaper, like less than half price. So suddenly I could get a pair of Royers.
Wow.
And now it's like a big leap up in terms of equipment.
And so the Royers are, which ones did you get? The 121s?
Yeah.
And then what sort of, when you describe a price that's going to be too much, feel free to share numbers just in ballpark so that people sort of can start to conceptualize.
I mean, the thing is, it's raised and raised over time, because to start, when I first started out, I was like, £300 for a mic, that's a bit much. I guess I could sort of save up for that. And then as it's now, I'm saving up for like a Chandler Red mic or one of those type mics, which is like $4,000 or something. So as I guess now I'm actually earning a lot of money back from it, I feel more comfortable investing back in it. But it's all, I think the threshold of what I felt comfortable spending is definitely raised over time when it kind of became more serious. But also I think I buy most stuff secondhand, so if I did want to resell it, I wouldn't be losing any money on it, which I think is a great thing, especially if you're starting out.
Yeah. And then I like to hear how you're like, you start out at one perspective, and your perspective can change a little bit because your ability to reach for nicer pieces of gear changes, but all along the way you're trying to set your standards pretty high just within your what's possible for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to start with, I was like, I want to get, as most people would do, like I want to get enough kind of basic mics together to be able to record a band, and that wouldn't have been like a lot of great mics or some alright ones, like a lot of 57s and stuff like that. But then I kind of slowly realized, well, actually, I could just save up for another few months and get the guitar mic or the overhead mic that I really want to get. And I was like 17, 18 at the time, so I wasn't in any kind of rush. So I just thought, okay, I'll play the long game and try and get a professional studio together, which has very luckily worked out.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very interesting. An idea that pops into my head hearing you talk about this is you could almost consider the instruments you're going to record in the same way. It's like, maybe I'll start with one really high quality mic and I'll learn how to record what one mic can record. And then I'll move on and I'll just sort of add instruments and context along with the gear that I start to acquire.
Yeah, definitely. And the good thing about having all of this stuff myself is I can learn how to use all this equipment just in my bedroom, basically. I mean, obviously not with drums, whatever, but I can record a guitar amp and spend several hours figuring out my favorite way to record a guitar amp just in my room or anywhere.
Come on.
So I can kind of hone my skills.
I was going to say, come on, mom and dad. We want to rock out some drums in the house too, please.
No, not quite that. But
not quite there, huh?
Yeah, everything else you can mostly do kind of to a degree and figure out your favorite ways to record, and especially with your own equipment, and sometimes borrowing equipment from other people, borrow someone else's mic, discover that you really like it through your preamps with your amp or whatever.
Now, do you have rental opportunities where you are for gear, for renting high quality microphones or preamps or any of that?
I think so. I haven't really looked into it. Thing is, I know quite a lot of people who are in recording, so if there was something that I really wanted to kind of figure out to use, I might be able to kind of ask around and see if anyone has one, or just like get a demo deal from one of the dealers, but I haven't really looked into rentals.
Well, that certainly exists here in Nashville, or even around this region, and it's a pretty cool opportunity. But one difference is when you rent something, you feel a lot of pressure to get something perfectly right on the one day you're renting it for, versus when you own a piece of gear and you can really try a lot of different things in your bedroom studio. You really get to understand how it works.
Yeah, I mean, also because I interned at quite a lot of studios, I kind of could figure out then what mics I did like and what I didn't like, and kind of occasionally borrow mics from those studios. And I don't think I've really sold many mics I bought because I didn't like them. Luckily, because I've kind of read about them. And the good thing about now reading about stuff online, obviously don't take everything you read in a forum at face value, but you can see if there's a kind of general consensus. Like if you look at 5 different forums about people's favorite overhead mics, if the same name comes up again and again and again and again, you're probably not going to be disappointed with them.
Yeah, unless it's the same person with the same handle on all those forums, right? No, that's great advice. And I remember initially being in studios and seeing a piece of gear in action and going, I love the sound of that, like a Coles 4038, and I saved up and got that at the time. And that is a difference between, being around opportunities to hear gear that you don't own yet and then deciding to get it, or going to those forums like you're talking about, versus, when you're sort of in your own insular world, getting to know your own gear. Sometimes it does feel a little frustrating because you're like, if you're just using your own stuff all the time, you're not being exposed to new things quite as readily. But, we have incredible things like YouTube and everything now. So you really kind of can. And your podcast, your guests. Let's talk about your podcast a little bit more. When did you start the show?
Started it about 4 or 5 months ago. To be honest, this sounds a bit silly, but one morning I had the idea I thought, okay, well, I'm starting to get more recording work, but I've still got some time. So maybe I could start a podcast, because there's we can talk about this. There's kind of a gap that I saw, that the type of podcast about recording that I wanted. And so I thought, okay, who would be my dream guests? And I thought first, okay, Steve Albini is probably my favorite recording engineer.
Nice.
I'll ask him if he'll do it, and he's very open about being easy to contact. So I contacted him about it, and a few hours later he got back to me saying, "Yeah, I'll do your podcast." So I was like, "Okay, now I have a podcast."
There you go.
It was honestly less than 24 hours between having the idea and having the first guest, which sounds a bit stupid, but
he's pretty incredible. He really does follow through like that. He'll respond. He's not to make less of him being guest on your show or mine, but he's sort of jokingly self-described as a podcast whore is the way he talks about it.
Yeah.
Because he's like, he almost warns me, and I was just like, that's fine with me, man. He's a great guest, and he's done so many incredible things, and he's just so practical and down to earth about recording and making music.
Yeah, I really can't figure out why he has this kind of reputation of being difficult or something. He's one of the nicest people anyone will ever talk to. He's so open and helpful and supportive.
Yeah, well, he's unabashedly opinionated. So if he has something to say about anything, he'll say it. And I think he came up, in a time of punk rock and sort of going against the grain to major labels and all that kind of thing. And, now the whole industry has changed as well in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I guess the industry's kind of caught up with him in terms of his working practices, because a lot of the stuff he says now is like, just makes total sense. It sounds weird that anyone else was doing it any other way.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. I haven't heard anybody say it quite as succinctly as that. So you started the podcast. Question for you: how did you get such great guests on your shows?
I don't know is the answer to that. A lot of people have presumed I'm some kind of industry insider or something. Like I know loads of people who are in recording, but I really don't at all. I just emailed a bunch of people. Somehow in the first month, like Eric Valentine said yes, Steve Albini said yes, Butch Vig said yes, and I couldn't believe it really, because I was like, hopefully one day I'll be able to get those people on it, but I wasn't expecting to get them so quickly. Mm-hmm. Which is just through asking, like contacting managers, whatever. I feel kind of slightly bad saying that because I don't want people to hassle them or whatever, but it was just asking nicely, explaining who you are. And there have definitely been people who I've interviewed who have really helped me with getting into other people, like Mark Rubel, who you mentioned, mm-hmm. and also Mark Daniel Nelson, who got in touch with me after hearing the first episode, saying he really enjoyed it. And I knew who he was, so I interviewed him for it. And then he introduced me to a load of other amazing people. He's been so supportive and helpful with the podcast. I think without him, I wouldn't have got a lot of the guests I have.
Oh, that's great. What a great connector. Let's see. So it reminds me also of something I read from Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you ever followed him at all. Not in music, but more in online business and things like that. He encouraged people in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, to actually reach much higher. He's like, it's sometimes it's easier to get through to your absolute dream guest, for example, than it is to get through to somebody who's closer to your level of where you're at, who's just very, very busy and is getting a million requests for something. So I don't know if that applies in your case, but you certainly seem to be doing it well. Do you want to name some of the guests that you've really enjoyed having on your show?
Yeah, definitely. So I have the guests that there's, I've got about 20 more interviews I've done that aren't actually out yet. I don't know when this is coming out, but some of them might be out by then. Obviously the Steve Albini one meant a lot to me because he's my favorite engineer. I'm just going back on what you said before. I definitely asked about maybe 40 people in the first month to do it, and maybe 20% of those people replied. And it just so happened that out of those 20% of people who replied was Eric Valentine, Steve Albini, Butch Vig, etc., Matt Ross-Bang.
Yeah.
Anyway, Steve Albini obviously really special because he was the first person to say yes as well. And everyone's been great. So even if I am naming names, everyone has been great. Who else? Mark Howard, who just came out, was great because he does a lot of location recording as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about him too.
Obviously, Mark Daniel Nelson, who I mentioned, was great because he's been really supportive. There's one coming out soon with Bob Olson and Russ Tarana from Motown. I did a joint interview with them, and it was actually, the interview was the first time they'd seen each other in 30 years. It was really special to hear them kind of recount about the Motown days and talk about everyone they knew.
Recording Studio Rockstars Academy is the place you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free introduction to mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you are in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything else. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to Mix Master Bundle to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Let's start with some of your guests and talk a little bit about stuff you've learned from them.
Yeah.
But actually, you know, before we get deep into that, because I know we're going to get lost in that, which is wonderful, I do want to hear more about, you know, how you're building your business in your studio. So you've started to collect gear. You set your sights really high. One question I had about that was, why do you think you set your sights so high? Do you think it had anything to do with, you know, the music that you were a big fan of? For example, if you were a fan of punk rock bands around town, do you think you would have been more inclined to just pick up a whole bunch of 57s and start recording full bands versus really high-end microphones?
Maybe. I mean, there's certain microphones like the SM57, which through my own experience, I learned I wasn't a particularly big fan of in a lot of traditional situations, which is partly why I kind of went looking for something else.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'd used them and discovered that they were my favorite mic ever on guitar amps and snare drum, whatever, then I probably wouldn't have looked somewhere else. But I discovered just through personal taste that it wasn't really for me. So then I did have to go looking for kind of higher end stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of types of music, I mean, obviously you see your favorite engineers use certain microphones and stuff. I've never been like, oh, this person likes this mic, so I must definitely buy it. But you do kind of see recurring things like Royers and the Coles and, you know, AKG 414, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You see these mics used a lot, so you know that they're going to be great. And it was kind of through experience that to learn the difference in what the high quality gear does give you compared to different stuff. I mean, it's definitely not equal in terms of an £1,000 microphone is 10 times better than a £100 microphone. I mean, I understand the difference is maybe like it's a little bit better, but to me, I love recording and I love sound. So that difference is important to me because I love those little differences. That's what makes it really inspiring for me.
Yeah.
So if I maybe were just more interested in like making music, maybe I wouldn't care about that so much. I mean, I love that too, but I love sound for the sake of sound. So I am very interested in those kind of very particular things.
But what about the space? Like, where are you recording? I guess that's what I wanted to ask you about. You know, you're living at home with your parents and stuff like that, and you're talking about getting used to recording with these mics in your bedroom, but obviously I think you're going out now and finding spaces to record in. Talk about that process and about how you didn't let lack of studio location impede you in starting your business.
Well, it's partly luck, really. In the last 6 months, I've been very lucky to find this one hall, which is where I mainly work from, which just through a random series of chances, I'm able to hire very cheaply compared to like a lot of how other people would, partly because we live very near it. So that has become the center of my business in a lot of ways. Like if someone wants to record with me, that's the first place we'll discuss going, unless they want to do it somewhere else. And it's the kind of slightly ridiculously, if you were going to design a studio, you almost wouldn't design it any differently from that room. It's like loads of uneven surfaces. It's got like different spaces that you can close off from each other. It's got like big curtains you can move, dampening, and it's just somehow it's become like almost a perfect space for recording. So that's where I do a lot of my recording now. But I have, even before I found that, I was doing some stuff still, kind of did a lot of stuff for videos, like people would do a video recording in a church or something, so I could come to them and stuff like that. But for a long time, when I was kind of setting up, I was kind of confused about where I would be. A lot of recording, but then I found that space, and that's kind of become the center, really, just through luck.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I feel confused about what I'm going to do all the time, and you just have to jump in and use your best judgment on what you should try, and then commit to it and give it a go. Talk a little bit about how you integrate in a space like that. So obviously there's not necessarily a control room. There's not cables already routed through the walls, unless there are in that particular instance. How do you actually hook up all your gear and monitor and listen to what you're doing so that you can actually record an ensemble? And in that space, what sort of bands have you started to record?
Well, in terms of where I am in the room, I mean, I do something quite similar to what a few people do. Like Sylvia Massey records in the same room as everyone. And I think the church studios in London, they do as well. I'm just next to the bands. I'm normally like next to the drum kit, wearing headphones. That's how we all monitor through headphones. Sometimes I bring my monitors as well. But yeah, we're all monitoring through headphones. And I'm just sitting next to them, basically. And it does take longer to set up, obviously, than it usually would in a studio. But I kind of know what I'm doing now, so I can just do it quickly and get on with it. In terms of different types of bands, I had quite a few things, really. Had some kind of louder, bluesy, rockier bands. Had some more kind of indie bands. Had a few acoustic things. Got some orchestral sessions coming up. It's all sorts of things, really, because there's a variety of spaces and sounds in there. You can kind of do anything, really. I don't think there's anything that would be inappropriate.
So when you say bands, you're talking about drums, electric bass, electric guitars.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And slightly more acoustic stuff as well.
Now, what do you do for vocals?
SM7, as far away from the drum kit as possible.
Right. And you just, and is it far away because the drums are so loud in that vocal mic, or is it because you don't want the vocal to bleed onto the drums because you're going to replace it or anything like that?
I mean, it doesn't have to be far away. One of the things from the interviews that I've learned and kind of tried myself, which I'll talk about later, is when you're in big spaces like that, bleed is a lot less of a problem than you'd ever expect. Because if you're in like a tiny dead room, the sound doesn't really have anywhere to go. So the bleed is a lot more of a problem than if you're in a big space like that. I really don't have that many problems with bleed at all, surprisingly. But with the vocals, I've even used condenser mics and stuff in that room with the drum kit. It's just about, with bleed, I think it's more of a problem than people think it is. So I would say, within being sensible, just set it up like you usually would, listen. If there's a problem, then go and move it. But as long as you're being sensible, it normally isn't too much of a problem.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, it's that reminder of just keep trusting your ears and be ready to be flexible.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just kind of ready to change. Even if you write down like beforehand what mics you think you might use with everyone, sometimes something just doesn't work or sound like you expect, so you have to adapt.
Yeah, indeed. And I don't know if you've sort of discovered this, but I have here, the moment you commit to the location of a microphone, that sort of exponentially increases the chance you're going to have to move it anyway. So don't commit to those. It's hard to not commit with the drum kit, but certainly the individual mics, just make it flexible so that you can move it around and put it 10 feet over here along with the headphones and everything else. Now, how big is the space that you're in? Is it a big reverberant gymnasium or is it something different?
When you walk in, it looks like a big reverberant gymnasium, but somehow it actually doesn't sound like one at all. It actually sounds very clear, and it's got quite a very clear ambience rather than like a big kind of reverb, like hall reverb than you would expect from the space. I mean, like I said, somehow just through chance, it's almost designed like a recording studio room would be. It's like loads of uneven surfaces, big slanted roof, loads of different surfaces, and yeah.
Okay, so you talk about setup time being pretty quick. What have you learned about how much time you need to set up for a session, and how do you integrate that into your session? Are you, for example, having access to this space the night before and setting it all up, and then come in the next day, or do you just sort of wrap that into the beginning of the session time?
I mean, I could do stuff like that, but I haven't so far. I've been kind of lucky that a lot of sessions I've done there have been multiple days, and also I can go overtime if I need to. If there's not another booking there. So it's actually mostly been fine, because like a lot of the time might be like 3 days there or something. So even if it takes 2 hours, they've probably got stuff to do. They probably want to, figure out the songs a bit more or something like that. So even if it does take slightly longer, obviously I do factor that in and say, because obviously part of being a producer is time management. So I have to say, like, doing a 4-hour, or a half day session, that doesn't really make sense, because half of that is going to be setting everything up and packing away. So, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that's one of the challenges I have had in my studio setup, even because I still have to set up and tear down. And it's tricky. It's tricky to educate your clients that that needs to happen, and make sure that you're, including that in your time and your income somehow, so you compensate yourself for that time. And I know there's different ways to do it.
I mean, I guess partly luckily that the client is hiring the space as well as me, so we go in at the same time, if that makes sense. So they know that I'm not going to be there before them, like there for hours setting everything up. They're not paying me. They know that time is included kind of inherently in the hiring the space as well.
Mm-hmm. So are you producing, or no, you've got another producer you're working with often?
No, I'm producing. I don't, I've done some things with other producers, but a lot of the time I'm producing, sometimes playing on stuff as well.
What are your instruments? What do you like to play?
Well, I play all the kind of standard things a bit, like drums and guitar and bass. I think I've played a bit of everything on different people's records, some like lap steel and stuff like that as well. It's often friends that I end up playing on stuff with more than like random people, although sometimes I do as well. But yeah, I end up occasionally singing backing vocals and stuff on records too, just whatever it's called for.
So that's pretty cool. So yeah, I guess we didn't really talk about that. Clearly you have a musical background before 17. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you learned how to play all these different instruments?
Yeah, I mean, I started playing drums first when I was about 9, and then I had some lessons with that, but everything else has been self-taught, and it's just kind of, I mean, I was in a band and writing songs and everything from fairly young, and that's what I thought I wanted to do for a while. But then as time went on, I realized I was more into the recording and production end of it.
So you set up in this live space, and how close do you like to put yourself to the band and the drums? Do you like to have your headphones and your whole rig about in the same spot you would be if you were plugging a guitar into an amp and playing along with everybody?
I mean, to be honest, it's mostly dependent by stuff like cable length and stuff like that, like not more practicality rather than my choice. I mean, normally because there's a stage area in the hall which is raised and has curtains around it, which is where we normally do the drums. It's kind of a makeshift drum booth, and I'm normally on there with the drummer. So sometimes we'll have other people on the stage as well. So I might be normally maybe about 6 feet away from the drummer, and then everyone else is on the kind of floor of the hall, maybe kind of another 6 feet or 10 feet in front of me. And if I'm playing on it, then I normally just have the amp next to me where I have all my equipment and everything.
Wow. So that is definitely very close to the drums. What have you learned about using headphones? How do you know what you're recording when you're that close to the drums? I imagine you hear a lot of just the live drums coming right into your ears.
Yeah, I mean, with everything else, you can kind of monitor while you're doing it, like enough to be able to hear if there's any problems or anything. With the drums, you just have to record a bit and then listen back, check it, the sound, you're happy with. To start with, it's quite difficult to hear it as you're doing it, but just recording like them doing the beat for the song, whatever, then just listen back. All sounds good. All right, let's go.
Yeah. How many mics do you typically set up? And do you have to haul in a ton of mic stands? And also, how many inputs did you discover is like an appropriate amount to have for a session like this?
I'm fairly minimal in terms of mics, but I have a few, stand bags, whatever, that I bring all my stands in and cables and stuff. And I've got 18 inputs, which for me, for my kind of recording techniques, is enough for pretty much anything. I haven't come up in a situation yet where I've run out of inputs. I only use like 5 mics on the drums, whatever. So I know some people would go through 18 inputs straight away just through that many mics on the drums, but I'm not really like that.
So where do the 5 mics go for you usually?
I normally do Glyn Johns type overhead, or kind of somewhere between Glyn Johns and Recorder Man. So it's not maybe slightly more behind the drummer, looking over their shoulder than down by the floor tom.
Mm-hmm.
And then kick, snare, under snare.
Okay, cool. Cool. Take it. And then do you feel compelled to have room mics going on a session?
Yeah, I normally do. I normally just do the Steve Albini thing of just laying a pair down on the floor. I have the same, got those Octava mics that he recommended a lot, which are very cheap as well. So,
tell us about those. So which ones does he recommend?
The MK012, they're very cheap. They're only about 150 quid or $200, whatever, per mic. I think he uses the Omni capsules, but I use the cardioid ones, and he just places them. They've become his favorite room mics, and he just places them on the floor, kind of spaced pair in front of the drum kit, and that's what I do in the hall as well. Just the other side of the hall, spaced pair, quite far apart.
No shit. So, when I was recording with him, he would use those Altec Coke bottle. I think they're 150s or something like that. And he would sort of put a piece of tape on them to get the capsule even closer to the floor. But maybe the Octava MK12s were sort of new at that time, and he was beginning to use them more and more. So that's very cool. The nice thing about the Octavas is when somebody from the band steps on the mic when they're walking through the room by accident, it's a lot less expensive to repair.
Yeah, I do have a kind of makeshift safety talk at the beginning of sessions about please don't break all my stuff.
Yeah, you know what I used to do when I would put those mics down on the floor here, is I would take 3 drumsticks and I'd tape the tips together and I'd make a little pyramid out of them. And then I just set that on top of the mic so there was this like visible pyramid above the mic.
Also, luckily, because the room is quite big, people aren't really walking where the room mics are. And also all my cables are bright yellow, so people can normally see it quite clearly.
And that's very cool. All right, well, let's jump into, we'll jump into questions from your guests actually after we do the break here, because it's coming up right on it very shortly. So let me ask you a couple more questions about this. You record everything there, and then you take a moment to listen back. What does a beginning of a session and a sound check look like for you for a band? And if you're recording a full band like that, drums, bass, couple of guitars, vocals, well, how much time does it take you to set something like that up in that space?
I mean, the first priority for me is normally that everyone can just play together. So I want to get the things that they need to hear in their headphones, which is mostly just vocals. I want to get that set up so everyone can have the headphones on and just play together while I'm sort of working around them. Because they've normally got stuff to do. They can rehearse songs. There might be a bit they're not sure of in a song. So I'll normally get that set up and then sort of work around them. And then at some point I'll say, okay, can we just do like a verse or something of the song so I can check everything sounds good. After we check to sound good, make sure everyone's happy with the headphones. And then we just kind of start. I guess it takes maybe 2 hours at most, maybe hour and a half. It really depends on kind of number of instruments and how many amps and things people have and how many members there are in the band and that sort of thing.
So that's pretty cool, man. That's very inspiring to hear. I'm going to compare it to studio stuff a little bit. A 4-hour window is sort of what I try and set aside for setting up for a session the night before, which involves, drums, bass, guitar, whatever it is. Usually drums are the big issue, and getting everything set up and into the different locations. But then, this still requires a lot of isolated sound checking. And what's so cool about what you're describing in that situation is it's absolutely true. You really do want the band to warm up. It's like, somebody about to run a race. It's a lot better if you're warmed up and you've stretched out before you run the race than to have the band come in and immediately it's like, okay, go, Now, sometimes that's different. If you've got a band of, seasoned professionals, they're going to be ready right away. So you need to be ready right away in Nashville, for example. But particularly with bands like I think you're describing, where they really need to get into that comfort zone and get their fingers warmed up, because you're in this space, they already can hear each other, even if it's not a particularly good mix in the headphones yet. And just being able to hear that vocal means they can get started on rehearsing the song and getting everything ready. So you really get to get the best of both worlds. In the studio, for example, if I tried to do that, it would be very difficult for me to work around everybody. And as soon as I muted a mic, they wouldn't hear each other all of a sudden and that sort of thing. So that seems like a real benefit of that space.
I mean, the way I normally do things is ideally I only want the vocals to be in the headphones. I want everyone else to balance themselves out in the room. So have the amps and the volume that you want to be playing over the drum kit, not like crazy loud or very, very quiet. I mean, if they do want to do it quietly, I can fit in headphones, but I kind of want everyone to be able to balance themselves and hear themselves in the room. And then maybe they just have one headphone on with the vocals coming through, maybe like a click if there's a click or whatever. And if there's a DI bass, then obviously that's coming through as well. And also it only, because of that space, and I'm not in a separate room to them, it only takes me about half a second to just go and move the mic. Like I might just have to, walk a few steps and I can tweak something slightly. And a lot of things apart from the drums, I can hear in my headphones as they're playing it. So I can go and move the guitar amp mic while they're just sort of warming up and get it in the place I'm happy with. And the same for a lot of the other mics.
Now, are you setting everybody up so that they can, so that like, you have like the DAW going, but you also have one of those in between mixer apps between the interface and the DAW so that they can have like a low latency mix of themselves, but yet you can still solo things and do whatever you want in your pair of headphones to really see what everything sounds like?
I use the RME software, which is for the low latency monitoring. I mean, I don't really do a lot of, I want to be hearing what they're hearing pretty much at all times. So I normally go and, I normally go through and check the mic in the headphones to start with, so I can put the guitar up mic, hear how it sounds, go and move it if I need to, then I'll then turn it down so they don't need to hear it when they're recording or whatever.
Right. Well, that's cool, man. Well, thanks for sharing that. I love that. And I used to do a lot more of that kind of thing. Not necessarily full band so much, a little bit more just, field recording style when I first started out. And I'm excited to get into that topic with you because I know you just had Mark Howard on the show, and he shared some great stories about how that works and these incredible sounds you can get and everything. So we'll dig into that in just a moment. Rockstars, we're going to take a break now for the jam session, and we'll be back in a moment. Remember, things we're talking about, including a YouTube playlist of Hamish's podcast I put together in the show notes. So if you're on your mobile device, just scroll down and you're going to see the show notes right there. And you can click right through. And if you're on your computer, just go to rsrockstars.com. Hamish Benjamin, that's the podcast episode, and you'll go right to the show notes and you can see all this stuff. We'll see you in just a moment for the jam session. It was 1971 in a New York City basement when Eventide revolutionized the audio world by introducing the world's first studio effects processor, the Instant Phaser, and the first digital effect, the H910 Harmonizer. Eventide soon followed with the Instant Flanger, Omnipressor, SP2016 Reverb, and H949 and H3000 Harmonizers, which have been favorites of A-list mixers like Michael Brower, Joe Chiccarelli, Mick Guzowski, and Dave Pensato, and heard on countless hit records over the decades. Today, Eventide brings all that sound to your stage and studio with modern solutions like the H9000 Harmonizer, their complete line of guitar pedals, including the versatile H9 Max, and transformative plugins like Micropitch, Physion, Black Hole, and Mangled Reverb. Take your next mix in your studio to a whole new level. Go to eventide.com or click the link in the show notes below. Are you sick of bothering family and neighbors when you're just trying to rehearse or record your music? Do outside noises or computer fans get into your studio mics and ruin your recordings? You could book a pro studio to record every time, but that would add up quickly, and doing permanent construction to soundproof your studio can easily cost up to $100,000 or more. Trust me, I know. And you can't take that with you when you eventually move the studio. Don't you wish there was an easy solution right now? Whisper Room ISO Booths offers a simple way to install a comfortable, quiet, ventilated ISO booth in your studio with easy line of sight for recording vocals, guitar amps, or even drums in a variety of sizes. For 30 years, Whisper Room has been solving studio isolation needs worldwide with ISO booths that are shippable, portable, and can be assembled in an afternoon. Now you can get pro vocal recordings right in your home studio, practice whenever you want, and start using real guitar amps again. Get 10% off the 4x4 or 4x6 booths when you mention Recording Studio Rockstars at whisperroom.com or click the link in the show notes below. Are you using a Mac in your recording studio? Are you tired of feeling like the studio setup you worked so hard to create is becoming obsolete too quickly? Wouldn't it feel great to have a trusted friend to help you keep your existing Mac and studio setup current and relevant so that you can focus on the thing you love most, which is making great music? Well, now you can rely on OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, whose mission it is to help you get the most mileage out of your Mac. Whether you need to upgrade your RAM, install an SSD, add more connectivity, or simply find a great used Mac that's ready to rock, OWC will help take your studio far into the future with a vast library of DIY install videos, 24/7 friendly support, and free shipping in the US on most items over $49. Why get frustrated and ditch your existing computer when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. So again, congrats on your podcast. It's really great, and you've just brought on a wonderful list of guests, and you're much better about talking less than I am and just letting the guests kind of share these details about how they do stuff. One of the guests that I know you just had on is Mark Howard, who talked about recording in unusual spaces. Tell us who he is. Who are some of the artists that you got excited about that he's worked with? And what did you learn from Mark?
Mark was Daniel Lanois' engineer for a long time. So he did albums with Bob Dylan and Neil Young, Willie Nelson, and Emmylou Harris, U2. His credits are just unbelievable. And I read some of his book before the interview, but I didn't realize that every single album he's done has been a location recording thing. I mean, they'd go and do it would be kind of more set up and long term than what I do. Like they'd rent a space for like 6 months, whatever. But it would still be in a lot of different kind of weird spaces, and they'd have to work around a lot of things similar to how I do. So once I kind of started the interview and realized that, I was suddenly like, oh, this is somebody who does almost exactly what I'm doing. And I had a lot of kind of questions come to me suddenly about how he dealt with things that I had trouble with.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you remember learning or just like, really agreeing on?
I mean, we do have kind of some similar philosophies. He does a lot of more kind of unusual things, like he talks about recording with like a big set of speakers used for monitoring that like everything goes through and blasting through the room, which is obviously quite like a unusual recording technique.
Yeah.
And let me think. And a lot of just kind of, he like only uses 2 mics on drums, which I couldn't imagine doing in some of the spaces that I use. And yeah, and his book as well, which has goes into a lot more depth about some of the things we talk about, has been great too, especially for me. He does a lot of location recording. There's just endless like kind of tips and like how they place the guitar amp in a certain place to get the bleed out of the way, and the monitoring was this way and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I did notice you mentioned this having huge speakers in there, because you asked him if he was bringing headphones, and he was like, no, not headphones, huge speakers. Did you get the sense that those speakers are in the same space with the band, and how those work and get used? And I noticed he was also talking about recording vocals without headphones with the speakers blasting, so you really feel the sound pressure level as a musician playing. And what did you take away from that? What were some of the things you learned?
So I think what he was basically saying was that he runs all the mics through a large set of speakers in the same room as the band, so they can really feel what they're kind of playing coming back at them, which to me sounds incredibly difficult to do just through feedback and everything. But so then he said, like, for acoustic instruments, he would have to DI them and everything, because you couldn't really do that when there was such loud sound in the room and everything else. And you would do acoustic instruments afterwards. And I think the recording vocals, a lot of it was like just recording vocals in the control room, like he was saying with Michael Stipe, who was surprised he could record his vocals just like lying on the control room couch, whatever. Which I think that's kind of slightly more common compared to having huge speakers in the live room.
Did he say anything about the liveness of the space and whether that affected all these methods?
Well, I asked him if he had any kind of difficult spaces, and he mostly just said, actually, they were huge benefits because they had the interesting sounds, and he didn't really say liveness was ever a problem. I think you just have to be sensible, and if you know how microphones work and you know how sound works, as long as you don't do anything stupid, most of the time it's actually fine. And that's the kind of way that I look at it. Is, again, you read about a lot of these things like bleed and leakage and all this stuff, and people like saying stuff about it online, and you think, oh God, this is going to ruin whatever. But actually, as long as you are sensible and just don't have like the guitar amp like a meter away from the drum kit, facing the drum kit, whatever, most of the time it's actually fine. And what he was saying as well, which is large rooms, and I said this earlier, and Butch Vig said this as well, I think large rooms are much easier to work in with bleed than like high ceilings as well.
Yeah.
And smaller rooms.
Yeah, that's interesting. And when you're portable, you can go in search of those spaces. And then what about, other things, since the large spaces may not be actual recording studios, have you found, and have you had your guest comment on whether all these, random sounds that come in from outside are a problem or less of a problem?
I don't think I've talked about that too much. I mean, I quite often ask, if you realize what I do, you probably suddenly realize that a lot of the questions I ask are quite specific to my working habits. Like I asked if they ever work in difficult rooms, and if they ever like have problems with bleed, and if they ever record bands all at once. Most of the time when I've asked about difficult rooms, I think a few guests have said normally difficult rooms are like incredibly dead rooms, or rooms that have been incredibly tightly acoustically designed that just end up sounding really boring. They never normally say big rooms or too much reverb or anything. It's normally quite interesting, people's answers to that.
Yeah, well, Mark seemed to suggest, like you mentioned, that these different spaces have different characters, and that becomes part of the character of the record, the recording, and that's what makes it so cool. And I have experienced that before, and I'm missing it like crazy hearing you talk about it again. But like, I remember our band, we recorded in a house, and we set up the PA and decided to do a no headphones thing, and we just set up drums and amps and all played together, and the vocals were probably a 57 mic or a 58 right into the PA, and they're just coming back that way. And it has its own limitations of sound quality too. But we also did we would do it through a mixer and just straight down to a 2-track DAT machine. So that was how we recorded it then. So it was like you had limitations of not being able to remix it later, but you had the benefit of the fact that the sound was sort of pure as it went through the mixer and DAT straight to get recorded. And it had a natural cohesion of all these elements, and it, the band's just playing together. And so it feels great like that.
Definitely found that a tight band. I found this very early on when recording as well, that even if I like recording something in my room, like me overdubbing myself compared to recording my band, even though not very good studio, suddenly when I was recording my band and we were all fairly tight, just suddenly sounded much more like a record than me doing it not very well myself. I mean, obviously the overdubbing process can come out great, but it was kind of much easier to get something that sounded quote unquote like a record with a tight band all playing together.
Yeah, indeed. I agree. There is a thing that happens when the band's playing together that just doesn't seem like it can happen when you do overdubs. When you do overdubs, I think you instinctively try, because you're trying to control stuff, you end up with something that feels much more like a controlled sound, because you can. So then there's room for both in the world, obviously, but there's something very fun and immediate about playing music together and recording music and bands together.
Yeah, I mean, if someone wants to do a project like all overdubs, I'll definitely do that. I mean, it goes back to the Steve Albini thing of respect the artist. If it's their album, ultimately, I'm not going to enforce anything on them. I mean, most people are relieved when I say that, why don't we just do it all live, whatever. They're like, oh, thank God, I didn't want to have to do this whole kind of tedious overdubbing thing. I'm really glad we can just do it together. If someone does say, like, just do the drums first and overdub everything, obviously I'll do that. It's their record, it's not mine. But also the podcast has partly been great to see all these different people. Some, like Matt Rossbang, whatever, they will record everyone in the same room. That's their thing. Then some like Rich Costy doesn't do that ever. He'll he'll do like drums and bass first, and load up everything separately. And obviously, they both make amazing records. So,
let's talk a little bit more about the recording everybody together thing. So, Matt, Mark, both those guys, I think, talked about the sort of the Glyn Johns lining the amps and the drums up wall of sound approach. You know what I'm referring to there, where the amps are right in line with the kick drum, and also he made an interesting comment, and I want to hear what you say about it. But the idea of if the amps are all far away from each other, it starts to mess with how the band plays together. Versus when they're together and it's tight, the band plays in a unified. Oh, I think Vance mentioned that as well.
Yeah, I think Vance, because I asked about Vance did this video with Sound on Sound about recording a band, and so obviously to prepare for the interview, I watched that, and then watching that, I actually just suddenly had a load of quite specific questions about the thing he did in that video, which obviously kind of translate to other stuff as well. And one of the things was the Glyn Johns thing of placing the amps in line with the drum kit either side of it, so then the kind of room sound is more cohesive, and the isolation is quite good as well.
Yeah, and the band can hear each other and play together in time. Sometimes we take that for granted. We forget how important it is for the musicians to actually just feel the rhythm of the song in unison.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one thing that sometimes you might have to use headphones to kind of help with that, especially in a large room like I do, but haven't had too many problems with it so far.
Yeah, I'm very tempted to try that in my studio as well. And of course, the challenge is it's not a big space and it's not a big room. So there's gonna be bleed because things come back in through the walls. But I'm very curious about how much I can get away with for that. And it's exciting, it's exciting to record people and make it really fun for them to play and easy.
Exactly. I mean, it's so much more fun for everyone involved to be in this, like, and this hall's in a very kind of idyllic countryside place as well. And so everyone's just like, they're so glad not to be in a tiny little dark vocal booth doing something. They're glad to just be in this nice space, kind of airy and loads of natural light. And it's kind of like, I can't remember who I asked, but I said, do you do any, might have been Rich Costy. I said, do you do any like recording bands all at once? And he was like, no, unfortunately, but that sounds very romantic. And that's kind of how I think of it. It's like, it's almost like when you imagine a record, a lot of my favorite records, they kind of sound, even if they're not, they sound like everyone playing together in one space. And all my favorite sounding records actually are that, like, or mostly that, like Exile on Main Street or like the band's records. It's everyone in the same room, sometimes quite a small room, playing together or looking at each other. And even if the sound quality is slightly compromised by that, I still think there's a kind of special something that comes from that.
Yeah, because there's a new sound, a new unified sound that comes from that didn't exist when you isolate everything.
Exactly. And again, I think bleed is a lot less of a problem than people think. Like, so the hi-hat is quite loud in whatever mic, but put up everything in the mix. Can you hear it in the mix? I mean, if you can, then you need to change it. But if you can't, then it probably doesn't matter.
Well, I did a jazz recording that in my studio that had a ensemble of musicians where I did no headphones. I encouraged them to do that. And it was drums right next to the piano. Upright bass was the trickiest one to record, but there was also, probably 1, 2, or 3 horn mics going on. And I don't think we had a electric guitar in it. But we even did a couple of songs with vocals, and I just put, a condenser vocal mic right next to the piano, right next to the drums, and completely got it to work great. It just required the musicians to balance their own volumes together naturally in the space.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden everything came together.
Like the Wilco, A Ghost Is Born record, if you look at photos of where they recorded that at CLC, you couldn't believe that's how they recorded it, because like Jeff Tweedy standing right in front of the drum kit with a vocal mic. Like, I think they were saying he had literally put his hand out and touched the ride cymbal. But it's like a very clean sounding, kind of neutral sounding record. You would never expect that they're all in this tiny room together.
Yeah, well, I think that, having the vocals close to the drums, if you're going to use those vocals, it actually sounds less like bleed because the drums are so close already. It doesn't sound like you're hearing something across the room phasing out and getting all weird.
Yeah, I think several people have said that on the podcast, actually, that having stuff closer together can make bleed much less a problem than if you have everything super far away. I think that's especially true in like a deader room where kind of sound goes everywhere. If you have the drum kit right next to the guitar amp or whatever, even if the guitar amp is in the drum kit mics, it sounds like a drum. It doesn't sound like a drum kit far away bouncing off loads of stuff. It just sounds more like the guitar amp or the drum kit or whatever.
Yeah, and then the individual sounds, the guitars themselves, start to sound less clinical. It no longer sounds like just a single 57 on the amp. It sounds like a wider, more stereo, interesting guitar sound because it is bleeding through other mics as well.
Definitely. I think Matt Ross Bang's records are like the textbook for that. Like when I asked him what microphone to use on an electric guitar and he said like a 57, I couldn't believe it was 57 because it doesn't sound like what my experience with 57 sounds like on a guitar amp. But then it's everything else in the room combining, all the other mics helping.
Yeah, indeed. Now, and also you're recording in a pretty large space, so you may not be getting, you might actually want more bleed for some of those sounds and some of those mic choices, and maybe you'll discover that when you're in some different spaces as well.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the not recording in, with the bleed. You talked about Rich Costi. You've also had Eric Valentine on the show.
Yeah.
And he's somebody I'm very excited about some of the stuff that, he's shared about how he records because he's super, super dedicated to the craft, Talk a little bit about what you learned from those guys about recording drums.
Eric Valentine was kind of the perfect guest in a way because some of my early idea for the podcast was to talk about, especially some of the older guests, was to talk about how their recordings have changed like over time. And some people it hasn't changed at all, and that's fine because their records all sound great. But Eric was the perfect example of like back 20 years ago, he was the guy using completely separate drums, sometimes separate cymbals. Everything had like 3 compressors on it. Everything was super crunchy, but now he's kind of transitioned into more natural, like one microphone and like on just like one condenser mic, using a lot of stuff, much more naturalistic sound. And it kind of just goes to show you that it's really not about the specific, despite my podcast being just about this, it's not really about the specific technique or whatever. It's about the person and their skill to get what they want out of different situations.
Mm-hmm. They're like the different techniques for recording are like different color palettes. And when you're really talented as an artist, you know how to assemble those into something really compelling.
Definitely. It's definitely been my experience as well. It's like, obviously when I got a mic that I liked more, I could get a better result that I was happy with. But now going back to those mics that I didn't really like early on, I find that I can get a better sound out of them than I ever could then. And even if I still have the same like hang-ups about them, I'm now happy with the sound, and I could possibly use them in the way that I couldn't when I was just starting out.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like, the life journey where there are some kids you just never were friends with in school or something like that. And you just seem like you're totally at odds with each other. And then later on in life, you re-meet and you're like, hey, you're all right after all. We could totally be friends, You just never know, it's that important journey of going through all these different trials of sounds and everything. So you discover at the right time for you what might work. Plus there's just so much to learn. Yeah. Even if you're only talking about 4 mics, there's so much to learn about all the various ways you could record with those 4 mics,
Yeah, definitely. And I will say Eric Valentine's now started his own series of videos, which are great. So if you want to learn a lot more very specific details about how he records everything, he has a lot of amazing videos on YouTube now going through a lot of his classic songs. But he's just always been one of my favorite recording engineers. Just all his records, they all sound different, but they all sound amazing. And that's kind of what I want to be as well. Just like, even if my records all sound different, I want them to sound great.
Indeed. Well, what about some of the things you've learned about different mic pickup patterns? Because I know you've asked some of your guests those questions as well. I've heard you ask them about like, do you use a figure 8 and stuff like that. Tell us what you've learned. You also mentioned Steve using the Omni capsule on the floor. Tell us what you've learned about the value of pickup patterns on mics, and when do you decide to switch them on a mic or just choose a different mic?
Funnily enough, I did ask that quite a lot, but the answer most of the time was, oh no, I just cardioid normally. So I kind of stopped asking that now because people just were like, not that they say it didn't matter, but they didn't really have anything interesting to say about pickup patterns. And I'm sure some people do. It's something I've thought about quite a lot. But actually, most of the time, people are just using cardioid, to be honest.
Now, how about you? Have you found some situations where you'll choose an Omni or you'll choose a figure eight?
I don't really use Omni too much just because of kind of uncontrolled stuff. I mean, actually, Al Schmidt, who I've interviewed, who isn't out yet, he's obviously someone that uses a lot of Omni and in spaces similar to mine. So he's the kind of, again, another example of you can do it these two completely opposite ways and get great results if you know what you're doing. I haven't experimented with Omni too much. I mean, I use a lot of ribbon mics, and those are definitely like figure eight ribbon mics, which is definitely a benefit in a space like that. You can reject things. And like, I guess it's mostly useful on drums and guitar amps. Like you can have it so the guitar amp is facing away from the drum kit, but also the figure eight mic is, the null point is also towards the drum kit to kind of get the best separation possible.
Now that would be if the guitar amp was sort of at a 90-degree angle to the drums, or would you just scoot the drums? Would you scoot the amp back a little bit or something like that? Or is it if the amp and the drums are lined up with each other, do you feel like that rejection still sort of rejects the drums over to the side?
No, I haven't really done the lined up stuff too much just because with the space I work in, you can't do that very easily. But again, it's normally like kind of sideways on, so the speaker is pointing kind of sideways to it, and then kind of in front of the drum kit, the speaker's pointing sideways, and then therefore the figure eight mic, like the Royer in front of the guitar amp, the null point of it is also facing out the drum kit.
Now, do you have a long headphone lead for yourself where you can, you can walk over to the mic and solo up that guitar mic and listen to the drummer play, for example, and just kind of position the mic to like, okay, cool, that's rejecting the drums as much as possible. Now let's scoot the amp to being in front of that mic.
I haven't really done that. I mean, I do definitely have the long headphone leads and go and move the close mics, but it's more to get the sound of whatever they're recording than worry about bleed. I mean, because normally I'll do like we do like test recordings or whatever, check everything's all right. Again, if there's an obvious problem, then I'll move stuff that isn't. If there isn't an obvious problem, even if there is bleed, I normally just won't worry about it unless it becomes a problem at any point.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Maybe talk more about drum stuff that you learned, studio techniques. Did Eric talk about the drumbrella, for example?
But yeah, I think he did a little bit. I mean, again, obviously everyone would love to have one. Anyone who doesn't know, it's kind of big, I'm not sure, like sound isolation umbrella basically that you can lower like over a drum kit or have it as high as you want to change the sound of the room.
Yeah, it's almost like imagine the roof of a gazebo just on a chain, right? You can lift it up or drop it down.
Yeah, at his Barefoot Recording Studios, and we talked quite a bit about him recording drums in his Tafangadai studio now, which I don't know if it's in his house, but it's kind of much smaller space. It's just one room, and he's kind of talking about how he records drums now, and just like with one mic, he puts the drum kit in the corner. It's normally him playing, so he can balance it himself. And I think we talked about a lot of ways to get very. I quite often ask about very minimal drum recording techniques because that's what I love to do, to try and get as minimal kind of in terms of mics as possible. And like with Steve Albini, I asked him because he's obviously known for using a lot of mics on the drum kit. And I asked him about the times when he had to use the least amount of mics. So he had some good stories about situations where he could only bring 2 or 3 mics and how he placed them. And it's interesting to see how a guy like Steve would do that with his ears if he could only use that number of mics. So obviously that might inspire someone who, through whatever reason, maybe they don't have many channels, would record drums. Because obviously we get to see how Steve does it his way. But it's interesting to see how he does it and how other people do it, like in a way what isn't their usual way, but how they use their ears to get kind of to go around these certain things.
Do you remember some specifics about what Steve said if you only was taking 2 or 3 mics?
Oh, I'm terrible at remembering specifics of what people say. People ask me all the time. Like an interview that just came out, what did you learn from it? I'm like,
I learned that.
Give me 10 minutes. Like,
You're like, I learned how to start it and not talk, and I learned how to press record, make sure it got recorded, and I learned how to make sure it got shared with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, like when I go back and edit them, like a few weeks after I did them, I learn it all again. And
yeah, me too. It's when I get a chance to like listen to the interview in the car, just be a listener. That's when I really learn the most.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely need to go back and do that for some of the interviews, because like there's some things that really stick with you, and there's some like amazing tips that you just like for some reason will just like go out of your head, and you kind of relearn them. And even I do that with other people's interviews as well. Like I re-listen to like long interviews with Steve Albini, and like I'll learn like 3 new things even though I've listened to the interview before.
Yeah. Where and when do you like to be a listener of a podcast?
I mean, I listen to podcasts a lot. In terms of recording podcasts, normally just, sitting down with my laptop just while I'm doing something else. And I mean, your podcast is one of the ones that inspired me to start my own. There's several great recording podcasts.
Thanks. I'm glad it helped, man.
Definitely. Yeah. And again, like I was mentioned earlier, like there's a lot of amazing recording podcasts, but there wasn't a super nerdy one, which is what I wanted kind of to listen to, because I really enjoy your podcast and other people's podcast. But I was always like, I really wish they talked about this really nerdy, in-depth like thing, which obviously not everyone wants to hear. But that was kind of my niche that I really wanted to get into, so that's why I started my own. But do you listen to
how do you describe what that nerdy thing is? What is the nerdy thing that you wanted to focus on in yours?
I think it's things that really make a difference to the sonics of a record. So anything that really makes a difference to that guitar sound or that drum sound, and that can be anything from a more philosophical thing, or it can be like we put this mic through this compressor and this EQ at this particular frequency. It's like it does tend towards the more techie end, but it's just about what really impacts the sonic quality of a record.
How do you go through a process of knowing what questions you want to ask each guest?
I mean, I have like you do, I have a kind of basic set of questions that I know I want to ask. Like I normally go through all the different instruments and talk about their approach to recording them. And then I have some kind of standard mixing questions as well, which is stuff that I don't really see people talk about like their mix bus and if they use groups and stuff like that. And then obviously guest by guest, I research them and come up with more kind of specific questions. I normally only ask about specific things if it's something that I'm already a fan of, because I feel like coming up with questions specifically about something that I didn't really know, I probably wouldn't be able to come up with very good questions. So I only really go into I only really ask about specific records if it's something that I'm already a fan of and was personally wondering something about.
Well, it's certainly challenging trying to figure out what the right questions are to ask. And every guest is so different, and every guest likes to speak differently. Some have short answers, some have long answers, and learning how to navigate that stuff is quite a journey.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely been a process. I think I'm a lot better at it now than I was, however, like 3 months ago, how long it was. And also like my first, I think the first two that came out, Eric Valentine and Matt Rossbang, you kind of listen, you can see that, because early on I was starting with this kind of thing of how has it changed over time. And with Eric, that question worked perfectly because he had a really clear way that his recording had changed over the last 20 years. Whereas with Matt, the second time, he was just like, mine hasn't really changed. So the question kind of fell flat. I mean, we still talked about a lot of great stuff, but that was just kind of great example of you can't just always ask the same questions, because sometimes they just don't really work with everyone.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's talk about bass and guitars a little bit. Anything you learned from Eric Valentine? You also had another wonderful guest who's been on my show as well, Joe Chiccarelli. What were some things you remember learning about that topic or from Joe?
I think they're both quite interesting, because again, they don't have like one go-to mic. They're using quite a few different things and combining them in weird ways. Like there's a great video with Eric from a few years ago about him recording guitars of Queens of the Stone Age, and he's like combining like 5 mics with like really specific EQ and all this super specific stuff, which is like something that I would never dream of going into because it would just help my head. But then now he's using one condenser mic 4 foot in front of a amp, and that's his guitar sound now. So it's really interesting to get again see that it's not you can do anything and make it work in different situations. Again, Joe is another great example of that. Like to me, I wouldn't say Joe is known for a sound in the same way that like Steve Albini is. Like when you think of Joe Chiccarelli, you don't think of one particular instrument and how it sounds in a way. He's just great at what he does. He just makes great sounding records with great people. He's not like a person who's known for just getting one sound. He has a really particular way he goes about getting it. He's just like a great all-rounder. He can do anything and he'll use any mics to get there.
Yeah, well, Joe's been doing this for a long time too. I mean, he talked about starting out with Frank Zappa with me early on, and he's done everything to, here in Nashville, working with artists like Jack White and the Raconteurs. What about some of the guests that you've had on and how they related to some of your favorite records? Is there anything that just like you personally were really excited about and you've learned by doing the podcast with particular guests?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Matt Ross Spang, I had some quite specific questions about some of the Margot Price records he worked on. And a lot of the answers weren't at all what I expected. Like, as I was like, what's this guitar sound? He's like, oh, it's an SM57. And that's like, that's not what I was expecting at all. And same thing with Steve Albini. I talked about this Magnolia Electric Company record and asked him some kind of question because there's a good documentary about the recording of that record. And I asked him about a lot of techniques I could see him using in that video and his like reasoning behind them and stuff like that.
Magnolia Electric, is that the band?
Magnolia Electric Company, yeah. It's called the Josephine album. If you search on YouTube, there's a really great. If you want to see Steve Albini recording an album from like start to finish, that's a great documentary to watch.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and the songs are great too. I kind of got into that album through watching that documentary. Then I slowly started getting really into the music as well. And it's one of my favorite sounding records ever. It's just so much depth and space. And it was just great to hear him talk about how he got those particular sounds to the best of his memory, because it was a long time ago. I'm trying to think who else has done records that I love. I mean, obviously, it's great to hear Butch Vig talk about Nirvana and Sonic Youth and everything. And I was trying to kind of get to the pieces of information that I couldn't find easily online about those records. So hopefully I got some new things.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about recording it, was it Sound City?
Yeah.
With Dave Grohl and those guys, and how the room and just like everything sounded great if you put it out in the room and recorded it, because the space was great.
I mean, sometimes with those sort of people, it can be more difficult to come up with questions because they've been asked everything under the sun already. So it's like, especially with Al Schmidt, it's probably the person I struggled most with questions, because what do you ask Al Schmidt that hasn't already been asked?
Well, it's all right. We don't mind. A lot of lessons in life we need to keep learning over and over again. So it's okay to get the similar answers.
Al Schmidt's the only guest. When I asked him what bass mic he used, he went for upright bass rather than electric bass.
Oh, very cool. Do you remember what some of his answers were?
He talked about quite in depth about some electric bass pickups that I was just kind of smiling and nodding along to, because I don't really know anything about that area. But so I can't really remember, but I'm sure there's lots of great advice in there if you're into upright bass.
Oh, the different upright bass pickups. Yeah, that makes sense. And those can really be valuable when you're recording upright bass, because a lot of times it is quite a challenge to get all the sound you want just out of the microphone. In my experience, having a really good large diaphragm condenser mic with a really good bass and a really good player in a really good space is kind of the secret to getting it right, with really great mic pre's and probably a really good compressor on the way in.
Yeah, I think that's the secret to recording anything, really. But I'd say, I mean, I haven't really recorded much upright bass in my own recording, so I don't have any opinions about it. I haven't really tried anything that's worked or failed, so I can't comment too much.
So you're doing electric bass on these location sessions mostly. Are you doing a direct for the bass and an amp? And do you have any comments on which of those two you find the most useful when it comes time to mixing?
I pretty much always do either. I don't really like doing both. Normally, when we use bass DI, it's because that's what they wanted to do, or just no one brought an amp. So we'll sometimes, like quite often, if I'm doing something with like a sort of assembled band, like it's all their friends coming to make a record with them, or it's like one or two people coming and then they're overdubbing things they haven't really thought to bring a bass amp, so we'll just DI it then. If we are using a bass amp, then I normally just put one mic on the bass amp and get it right, and that's my bass sound.
Have you found a favorite mic for yourself or a favorite DI that you like to use?
My favorite bass amp mic is the Blue Mouse.
Blue Mouse, interesting. I don't know that one. Tell us about that.
It's a large diaphragm condenser mic that's designed for low-end kind of bassy sources. I got interested in it because in the Wilco I'm Trying to Break Your Heart documentary, which is about them recording Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, you see them using it a lot on vocals and various things. And also they come up secondhand significantly cheaper than they are new for whatever reason. So I got one, and yeah, I absolutely love it on bass amp. It's got all the low end and articulation and that kind of 60s, like slightly kind of punchy upper mid-range thing, which I love.
That's good. And then where, how close do you like to put it? Is it right in the center of the cone? Anything you've learned about that?
I normally, if it's in the same room as everyone else, I normally have to put it right on the grill. Normally it depends a lot by bass amp. Normally I think it's been slightly off center, maybe at a slight angle pointing inwards. I think it's been the best.
Yeah, that's sort of reminding me. When we recorded with Steve, he would use a variety of things, but I think one of them was the Biodynamic. It might have been the M80 or something. It was a dynamic mic that would go right up on the bass cabinet, and it sounded great. I've been really enjoying just a EV RE20.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of it seems to bring out the mids in a nice way, but it's not overly hyped on the low end either.
Yeah, I know that's a very popular one. I did actually just buy one, only to then find out that the capsule is broken. So get the capsule repaired.
That's
I'll be able to.
That's one of the challenges of buying used gear and using eBay and places like that is
Yeah,
you might get a bad one.
On the good side, it was much cheaper than new. So even buying a new capsule, it's not going to cost me more than a new one was, but obviously still annoying.
Yeah, indeed. All right. How about tips you've learned in terms of recording guitars from various guests?
Acoustic or electric?
Both.
I think the thing that sticks out, and one of the best kind of tips I've actually put into my own recordings from Matt Ross Bang, which was kind of how to get the right acoustic guitar placement, was he puts the mic in front of the player, and the player's then wearing headphones monitoring their mic through the headphones. And then they will then move to get the tone that they like out of that mic, kind of brighter or darker. They'll move to how they expect it to sound in their head to get the right placement.
Interesting. So the guitar player has permission to just move the mic around a little bit until they like what it sounds like in their headphones?
Well, they're moving themselves rather than the mic. So they'll kind of move the mic around, like they'll move their guitar around. So maybe the mic's pointing at the body more, at the neck more, and they'll kind of move it around so they get.
Oh, right. Sorry, this is the acoustic. But this is for acoustic.
Yeah,
right. I do that too. I think, like, especially when you record yourself, you instinctively start to learn to do these different things. It's a lot harder to move the mic. So therefore, because the stand's sort of all set up for you. So you just sort of rotate, move around on it and see where it sounds cool to you, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think also you kind of have to give permission to someone to do that, because quite often people are just like, if they trust you, that you know what you're doing, they're just like, you put the mic there and they're like, okay, the mic goes there. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to let them do what they do. But if you say, oh, we'll listen to it, kind of move around, see what sounds best to you, then they'll do that more than if you just didn't say anything.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. That happens a lot in the studio. I think the musicians assume that, they should just sort of stand still. It's like having a doctor inspect you or something like that. It's like, no, just, do what sounds good to you. Also, it's very hard sometimes to train musicians to trust that their headphones either sound great or not great. And like, we're not done until you like what you're hearing out of your headphones. So even if you feel like you're beating me up about it as the engineer, don't give up, let's make sure your headphones sound great.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone has to remember that it's a collaboration. Essentially, every project we're working together to get the best sound for this thing. It's not like, obviously we're being hired, but the whole point is we're working together to get something you're happy with. So if there's something that you're not happy with, tell me, because I'm part of this project. I'm hired by you to get something that you are happy with, and we're working on that together. It's not just like you have to listen to me and this is how it should sound. We both have opinions. Ultimately, the artist's opinion is what's most important, and we can work on it together to get the best result.
Yeah, indeed. Now, this moving yourself in front of the mic idea makes a lot of sense with an acoustic. Did he share any tips like that with an electric guitar?
I think a lot of Matt's tips about electric were that he places one mic further away and then he kind of lets the bleed from the room deal with a lot of the sound. Like I was saying, I was surprised that he used an SM57 on some guitar sound. What he was doing is he was using it surprisingly like a few feet away from the guitar amp, which you'd never imagine would work for the 57. And then he was letting that be the kind of core of the sound, kind of the mid-range, but then a lot of everything else was coming from the kind of space and the other mics in the room.
Right. You'll get low end from a mic that's further away somewhere in the room as well, just because it's going to naturally bleed. When I worked with Dave Rollins Guitar Machine here in Nashville, he came into the studio and he claimed that like there were only a couple of favorite mics he ever had. I think one was the RCA 44 possibly, and then the other was an SM57.
Right.
And he swore by it, and he was like, he just had the entire band stand in front of a 57 and perform into an acoustic and singing. But it really did sound cool. It was mid-rangey, but it really like did a cool thing. And I think he like, it gave like a nice old school recording, and it really does bring forward the mid-range nicely too.
Go ahead. I personally don't really use 57 that much, but I know that loads of records I love have been made with it. So it's something that I kind of, at some point, I'm sure I'll go and re-examine a bit more and try and find ways to use it that I do like it. But I've kind of moved on to other mics that I prefer. Yeah,
well, there are so many great mics out there that do sound better than a 57 in certain situations, for sure. Eric Valentine talked about recording himself in a corner with one mic on the drums. Did you get any impression or do you have any thoughts about how you move yourself around and get that mic position properly when you're the drummer and you're also trying to make sure that the recording is right?
I mean, with very minimal mic techniques like that, I think it's very difficult to use one mic unless it's much easier if you're the drummer who's also recording it, because you can listen to what you're doing, you can listen to the mic and you can balance your playing accordingly. Unfortunately, most drummers don't really think like that. I mean, they shouldn't have to, that we should be capturing what they're doing. But that sort of very minimal technique mostly works if the drummer is very aware of the limitations of how you're recording it. And I think you have to be really creatively involved in the project to ask the drummer to do that in a way, because I probably wouldn't feel comfortable asking a drummer to do that in a lot of situations, because I just want them to do what they do and I'll work around it. But especially like I find myself easier to record playing drums than other people. That's something that's kind of natural, really.
I find that's true of me sometimes. Sometimes I'm a big pain in the ass to record too. Yeah, that's particularly if I have somebody helping me out on the other end at the running Pro Tools and doing a talkback. I can be a real pain in the ass.
Luckily, with the portable stuff, I can just have my laptop next to me. So.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that's really changed things for me, getting the laptop to be a remote control so that it's still being run from the control room, but it feels just like what you said, where my laptop is walking around to where I'm doing the recording. Helps a lot. But, sometimes you just feel terribly tangled in cables, and you're, trying to manage a keyboard when you're like, I don't want to touch a keyboard. I want to play guitar,
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of been recording my own album over time as well. And the experience of recording yourself and recording someone else is so different in so many ways.
So when Craig Alvin was on the podcast and when I've spoken to him here personally, he said some really cool things about doing something similar to what you said about the drums. I think it was when he would set up for sessions, he would actually go and play the drum kit himself, and he would listen in headphones and he'd get the sound so it sounded great to him on the drum kit. But of course, these were when he was producing and he had a kind of a vision for the direction the drums should go. And so he'd try and have the drums already sounding in the headphones to him while playing the drums like he hoped they would sound when the drummer for the band would sit down and play. And I thought that was really interesting, very curious. I've done that. I do that when I'm at Bonnaroo, when I do my hay bale studio. I actually set up the drum kit so that it sounds good to me. And I still adjust it when the drummer comes and plays, but it gives me some sort of confidence that we're starting from a good place, rather than when you are sound checking and you're just being the engineer in front of a pair of speakers. And if the real drummer isn't in there playing yet, maybe if I have an intern play drums, it just never really works very well because they don't know how to play drums, and it's just an interesting to think about those different angles on how to get started.
Yeah. Like I mean, just like I was saying earlier, because I basically work around the band when they're already sort of playing together, then I'm setting up around that. There isn't really any time for me when I'm setting up the mics and the drummer isn't there. They're playing the whole time, setting up and everything, or some of the time, hopefully. But so I'm kind of doing that, and then we'll do a bit and listen to it, and we'll move things accordingly and kind of do that process.
Do you have bands sometimes that just start out screaming loud and you got to get everybody to start balancing their volumes and turning the hell down? Or do they instinctively tend to do that when they're just playing together?
I mean, again, if the band trusts you in a way, it can be all right to walk over to someone's guitar and turn it down. I mean, I wouldn't do that with a total stranger, but if it's someone I know isn't going to be annoyed by that, I'll walk around and do that sort of thing. I don't think I've ever really asked someone to play louder or softer. I mean, it depends if you're engineering it or producing it, really, because if I'm just engineering it, it's not really my role to say stuff like that. If I'm producing it, I might say, well, actually, maybe I think the song would be a bit better and the recording would come out a bit better if you all did whatever. But yeah.
Well, the cool thing about that is if you're hearing the band cranking loud and you're setting up around them, it sort of helps you know immediately what to do and where to go. And it's like, if they're screaming loud and they think they sound good in the room, maybe that's a cue to myself as the engineer. Maybe that is the right sound, and I just need to figure out how do I capture that sound.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love Steve Albini, is because his view is, this is the artist project. I'm going to get it how they want it to sound. I'm going to work around that. I'm not going to be someone who, like, because he was saying when he starts early and when he went to studios early in his career, he'd always see engineers asking like punk bands to turn down and use less distortion or whatever, which would then make the record not sound like the band. And I never want to do that. I mean, I might explain to them some reasons why, in my opinion, it would be better to do something or other, but I'm always going to go with what they want to do.
So now, what are some great tips you learned from your guests as far as vocals? What are some other cool vocal recording tricks you remember learning?
I mean, everyone does differently, really. I mean, again, all mics from 58s to E47s have been talked about. I'm trying to think if I can think of anything specific. I mean, some people use loads of compression stuff on the way in. Some people use none.
You're using an SM7 a lot on your sessions.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, sometimes condenser mics as well. I mean, like I said, I'm saving up for a super fancy condenser mic now, so that I'm sure that'll get used a lot more when.
And that's the Chandler Red.
Yeah, that's the goal at the moment. I mean, maybe you shouldn't say this in the podcast, but I'm just waiting to see who I can get a sponsorship from first so I can get a cheap one. But
well, that's all right. I did see the Chandler mics when I was out at Winter NAMM, and good Lord, they sounded awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm kind of honed on that mic specifically is every demo I've heard. I mean, demos, you kind of have to be careful, but if every demo you hear sounds amazing, you kind of know it's going to be amazing, and you can hear the thing in it that makes it amazing. And that's been my experience with the Chandler Red. It's like, so many of the demos I've heard have been like, this is one of the best vocal songs I've ever heard, and this is just like a demo.
Yeah, and that's going around on the forums, like you said, and digging around on YouTube and looking for these different examples.
Yeah, definitely. And I've spoken to people at Chandler, and they're all really lovely as well.
Well, I've been very fortunate also to have some great microphones and sponsors on the show. Jay-Z Microphones has shared some really great mics with me here. I'm really loving these vintage series microphones. And then also the Roswell Pro Audio, the Delphos mic. That's one that I've really enjoyed. And, it's an interesting juxtaposition between your options when you're trying to figure out what you want to get. And you've got, the interest in finding really high quality stuff that sounds great, that's in your price range. And then also setting your sights really high for something like the Chandler, which I think is, thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And, just sort of striking that balance and deciding what's right for you with your studio. But I think the encouraging thing, Rockstars, is knowing that it kind of, even what Hamish is saying here, it kind of doesn't matter. Decide on what your budget's going to be, do a little research, go out there and get it. And if you're smart about making the choice within your budget, you're going to end up with great gear. It's going to sound great. You're going to go make great records with it if you use the right kind of techniques.
Yeah, I mean, a good story I have about that is, like what I'm talking to you now on is just like a little Focusrite interface, which is what so I don't have to take racks and racks everywhere. Occasionally, if I'm doing like a vocal overdub somewhere that's like an extra after the record and I can't like get all my stuff somewhere, I'll just bring my little Focusrite, the whatever it's called, the 2i2, the cheap one, interface, and use that. And that's made it onto loads of records that I've done, just like a SM7 or an SM58 through the Focusrite, and that's been the vocal of one song. And I think the thing with preamps is, from my experience, is if you use, like, if I recorded everything through the little Focusrite interface, I think there would be a noticeable kind of, might be slightly sterile, be slightly thin in some areas. But if everything else is recorded through great preamps and one thing is through the like a not as good preamp, no one's going to notice. It stands up along with everything else. Like, and I've even had people say, like, I played someone some recordings I did, and for one of the songs for this album I was producing, the singer wanted to sound like they'd just woken up. So at the place where they were staying, I came there just after they woken up, and they did the vocal with a SM57 and my Focusrite interface. Like, and then someone later commented, "Oh, that's an amazing vocal sound. What's that vocal sound?" Like, just an SM57 through the Focusrite. And because a lot of people like know I do this podcast about gear and stuff, they're surprised by that I will use these kind of not very exciting things. But it's definitely a case of anything can work. It's just how you get it to work.
Yeah, indeed. I remember feeling a long time ago like, this is a little bit extreme, the statement, but there's no such thing as good and bad mics. There's just good and bad choices of when to use each of those mics. Because they each are
definitely.
colors. Each of them has a color. You could have the worst sounding mic in the world, but it might be the best choice for a particular overdub if that's the color you're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I use loads of different things, and the only reason why I kind of shot for the top was because, like I said, I had reasons why I didn't. Well, the things that I tried that were less expensive weren't ideal to me, but I know that loads of people have used those less expensive options and made amazing records. And like the reason why I got the Coles for overheads is just because none of the kind of, especially with minimal mics, none of the kind of options that were in the lower end really appealed to me. But I know that I probably could make a good result with that. And now I could make a much better result with that when I was starting out as well.
Well, and then of course you mentioned the Octava MK12s, those mics and the Omni capsules. I think it sounded like you maybe had 4 of them on your session, 2 in front of the drums, 2 way out in the room. Those are totally cheap mics, and and they really do sound pretty great. Now, have you ever explored the Octava mod guy who sort of will modify those mics?
No, not really. I mean, the way I use those mics is actually exactly how Steve uses them. So I have a pair of them which I use in the room, and then I have another one which I use for the snare top, which is also what Steve does. Especially recently, he uses one of those mics as a snare top between that or the Alltech Tube one, and then use the stereo pair, which is what I do as well. And occasionally they get used on acoustic guitar or something if we need a extra mic and I haven't got anything else around. But yeah, it's mainly those. Again, especially with cheaper mics, like I was saying, that channel mic or something, that's the mic where you can put it anywhere and it will sound amazing, or sound great at least.
Right.
With some lower end mics, they probably won't sound amazing everywhere, but they'll have some really specific uses where you can't beat them. Like the Octava for me on snare top, it's my favorite snare mic I've ever used. And it just so happens it costs that much. I don't really care how much it costs, but it's the perfect.
Man, you get me all excited to go break my Octavas out and try them on the top of the snare again.
Yeah, I mean, that's one place that I never really got on with the 57. So I kind of began experimenting and used various stuff before I saw Steve talking about these. I got one and tried it and loved it.
So Rockstars, if you happen to be, if you're listening to the podcast now and you're near the show notes, drop a comment in down below and let us know what some of your favorite inexpensive mics are in sessions. And then also, if you're listening to this on YouTube, that's a great place to just drop a comment in below and let us know, what some of your favorites are. It's one of the things I really enjoy about the podcast being on YouTube as well. It's just so easy to get a dialogue going with everybody. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course Mixmaster Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is these techniques would work for you in whichever DAW you're using right now. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even include in your mixing portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to Mixmaster Bundle to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Talk a little about mixing and mastering. What's some stuff that you've learned from your guests about mixing and mastering, and what's some stuff you've learned yourself?
I did just want to say on the inexpensive mics, listen to the Larry Crane episode if you're interested in that, because he has a lot of great things about sort of the mics out of the usual that you wouldn't expect to be used so much by someone like him, and he uses a big range. In terms of mixing and mastering,
hold on. Let me inject another question about that too. So, because this is kind of important, there's so much information that comes across. And as podcast hosts, I think we know that the ability to sort of perfectly condense that down into an easy to find bit of text is quite challenging. What advice do you have for listeners as far as getting the most out of all these details that come along on a podcast? How do you remember them and capture them yourself when you're just a listener?
I mean, you kind of have to figure out what you're going to take from it, really. I mean, even if they're not talking about a mic that you own, or they're not talking about like a piece of gear that you have, you might think, oh, they're using a dynamic mic in this place that I wouldn't have ever thought to use a dynamic mic. Maybe I'll try that. And oh, they're putting this mic here. I would never have thought of doing that. Maybe I'll use on my next session, I'll use this mic that I have in this place. And what I want to do at some point, which I haven't done yet, is do kind of timestamps so you can see more clearly when we talk about things to go back to them.
That's true. It is nice to be able to get back to listen again in that same spot.
Well, the kind of idea for the podcast almost was like an encyclopedia of like I was saying, I asked about all the different instruments. I kind of wanted the podcast to be like, oh, I wonder what kick drum mic Joe Chiccarelli likes on the inside kick. Okay, go to the podcast, find the bit. Oh, this is the mic he likes. And you kind of know that you'll be able to find that information. Like, or I wonder what Tom Mike, like Mark Daniel Nelson likes. Okay, I'll go to that episode, find that bit, and I'll be able to hear it. So to kind of have the same bits of information for everything, I think was important for me.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, all right, Rockstars, I'm going to encourage you, if you're listening to this and you're a super fan of the show and soon to be super fan of Hamish's show, and you feel like it, when you hear something you like on the podcast, especially if you're in YouTube, Mark, look at the time and in the comment below, just say, talked about, write down that mic number or whatever it is, or that mixing technique. And I think if you just put in the time, you just put in like 51 colon 45 or something like that, then that actually timestamps in the comments in YouTube so that anybody can click it, just seeing right there. And we'll try that as an experiment and see how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I need to get around to doing timestamps for the episodes at some point, but I'm sure, as you know, editing takes quite a while anyway.
Yeah, well, it's very time consuming. Of course, when we're making shows regularly, that we're always moving on to making the next show. And so to go back through all the old ones is quite a challenge. But anyway, you were going to share some of your tips about the mixing and mastering that you learned.
Yeah, so I quite like to ask stuff that, again, that I said, like, makes a difference to the final product. And then there was some stuff that I thought, like, I didn't really know much about, like the mix bus. Like, I know what I use on my mix bus, but what does everyone else use? I don't really know, to be honest, apart from watching stuff like Mix with the Masters, where you find out specific stuff. Like, so, and it's interesting to see some people use nothing, some people use loads of stuff. And again, like, I ask about, like, do you use processing on groups of instruments or individual instruments, and how do you choose which? And again, some people use loads of groups and parallel processing and sends. Some people use none. And it's just, I'm trying to think of any specific tips. I mean, there's definitely been, if you go through the episodes, there's definitely loads of great little tips. I can't think of any one thing that stuck with me, but again, it's loads of these little things that kind of influence what you do on your next session and might affect how you do things in the future.
Yeah, and I think what I'm getting from you is the same thing I experienced, is that there's just a huge variety of how people do it out there. But I would suggest that one consistency between everybody's stories is that ultimately people arrive at a choice through trial and error, and they discover what they like and what works for them. And that's how it goes. I remember watching a video with Andrew Sheps, and he's talking about his mix setup. This was actually one of the videos in Pure Mix. So Rockstars, you might want to check that out too. They've got a great collection of videos as well. But Andrew talked about, arriving at certain plugins that he can route stuff to. And it became clear that it's like, how do you arrive at that setting? Just by doing enough mixes, and the setting gets adjusted until you start to see, oh, it seems to want to stay around here. This will be my starting place for a template when I'm working. And then, you will have some guests that are like, I use absolutely, super, super minimal because I just try and get the sound right on the way in so that there's hardly anything to do in the mix. Like Alan Evans, I think, talked about that. And then some people are all about processing the hell out of stuff, You probably have to do a lot of processing because you're recording so minimally on the way in, or maybe not.
Well, one of my favorite kind of pieces of, like, advice I've heard, or like sayings, not even that really, was from Chad Blake. I think it was on one of the Mix from the Master videos. He was saying that his mix bus was like his modern equivalent of his tape machine. So, like, everything goes through this is, or his desk even, like, this is what my desk sounds like. And it's like 4 plugins that he doesn't really touch much. You might like change the threshold of compression or whatever, but he's like, this is my sound and everything goes through this. This is what my desk, quote unquote, sounds like. And you
don't happen to remember what those plugins were, do you?
I think Mix with the Masters might sue me if I tell you one.
Okay. I don't want to get you in trouble.
Yeah.
But seriously, man, we're going to come hunt you down if you don't tell us right now. No, just kidding.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
It might have been him who was saying that, because there's the UAD tape plugins.
Mm-hmm.
He was saying that, I can't remember, there's 2 big ones, like the ATR 102, whatever. He was saying that the one that was the other one to the one he used to use the tape machine of, to him sounded more like the other tape machine. That's a very vague piece of information, but anyway.
Well, I think that for me, the process has been, take a little time to try listening to each of these different plugins I've got, and I'm not afraid to just put a plugin on in its default setting and compare plugins that way. It's like, look, if it comes out of the gate sounding interesting to me, I'm going to take that as valuable, a valuable insight.
Yeah.
I know that you can get different sounds of everything and you need to adjust them and stuff, but it's like picking up a different guitar. You pick up a guitar that you think might be interesting and you tell pretty quickly. And, there's probably still a bunch of stuff you could do with the pedal and the amp to change it around. But, they all have a little bit of a personality when you first pull it up. And then, as is probably obvious, there is like each one of them probably does have a great sound in it. There's probably a bunch of great choices you can go to, and really to have sort of a minimal and, a minimally invasive thing that sounds pretty good that you like and have it be consistent does allow you to work within those boundaries,
Yeah, I mean, you're asking me if I use kind of a lot of processing with minimal mics. I mean, what I kind of do is I tend to choose my mics for the sound, obviously, but I tend to I tend to not do much processing on individual tracks.
Yeah,
so
you're not EQing on the way in, for example.
Yeah, no, so I'm not using very much close EQ or anything like that on any individual tracks. But then, so I'm getting the kind of sounds I want just through the mic choices and the preamp choices. But at the end, then on my master bus, I use quite a lot of stuff to make it kind of sound quote unquote like a record or like a modern record. So like a kind of happy face EQ and the compression that I want and everything like that. So that's kind of, so some people are quite surprised that I use a lot of stuff on my master bus, but then I'm not using very much at all on any individual channels. So I'm just letting the mics do what I want for the sound I'm trying to get, and the preamps as well. And
yeah, very interesting.
Then so at the end, I'm getting my kind of what I know translates to what. So I'm using kind of certain chain of plugins that I know translate what I'm recording to what sounds like a kind of what I want a record to sound like. And sometimes quite a lot of things that everything's going through, doing like little subtle things. Like Chad Blake has a great thing of like, for every analog piece of gear that you use, now you have to use 3 plugins. So like sometimes they use 3 very subtle limiters, like 3 EQs that are just doing the top end, and just like a lot of things, doing very subtle things to get to me like a finished sounding thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, you try a plugin, you add a little bit, you back it off. You're like, okay, that's cool. That's about the limit I want to push this to. And then you're like, what happens if I put another one after this? And then you try that. You're like, ooh, that does seem to sound a little better. So, you can kind of naturally come up with a few in a row. I know you can run out of space on your inserts and Pro Tools and all. Are you recording into Pro Tools?
I use Logic mostly. I do have Pro Tools, Logic. Okay, cool. I've always found Logic better for me.
Right on. And then you talk about good mic pre's, and I know that your interfaces are the RMEs. Do those have the mic pre's built in, or are you using different mic pre's?
They do have the inbuilt pre's. I use them for a little bit of stuff like room mics and stuff like that, kind of non-important stuff, or the stuff that you wouldn't really notice a difference in quality. I have a lot of other pre's as well. I've got some Manly tube pre's, which I use for drums. The 4-channel, I think it's called the Force. And I've got a lot of DIY 500 series preamps.
That you've built yourself?
Me and my dad.
Oh, cool, man. So your dad's a technician and an engineer as well.
Well, he actually makes acoustic guitars, but he knows a lot more about electronics than I do.
Ah, very cool, man. That's a lot of fun. I miss those days. That's one of the lessons I can learn about being 21. I used to be able to see what the hell I was doing when I was soldering. Now it's more of a challenge. I got to have, big magnifying glass, plenty of light, and my reading glasses on.
Yeah, I'm using Hairball Audio Lolas, some of my favorite preamps. There's a British company called AML who make a lot of great, really cheap DIY preamps that are really top quality. It's actually an area that I'd quite like to get into as well, is kind of designing and making some preamps available to sell, but I need to find the right person to collaborate with.
It's just fun to build them too. It's fun to, build them and then use them. And you certainly can acquire a very affordable collection of preamps by doing DIY projects, I think.
Definitely. I mean, these AML ones that I have quite a few of, they're like £220, like $300. And I wouldn't use them for everything. Like there's some mics I don't particularly like them with, but there's some mics I love them with, and they're just great general purpose preamps that aren't too expensive and really high quality parts. And yeah.
Now, have you learned pretty quickly that the biggest expense in mic pre's is the transformer?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've got kind of a few different preamps that I all like equally, and the prices vary quite a lot. You can kind of quite clearly see what the thing is that's making the difference.
And you're listening in headphones a lot of times while you're recording. What pair of headphones do you really enjoy?
I'll just look at what they are called now because I'm wearing them. I think they're the AKG K550. That's been my headphone of choice.
Okay, closed back or open back?
I think they're semi-open. I think with headphones, within certain parameters, like as long as they're fairly neutral, like not Apple headphones or like not kind of super hyped Beats headphones, as long as you're using something pretty neutral, I think something that you know is much more important than any specific headphone. Same with speakers, I guess. Like as long as you know what all your favorite albums sound like in whatever you're using, then I think you'll be able to make good decisions.
And do you have a pair of monitors, speakers that you like to use as well, back in your homes, back in the studio or something?
I do. I don't use them too much. I mean, I sometimes use them to check mixes, just see if there's any kind of problems on them. But I've been using this specific pair of headphones for so long that I just know like the insides and outs of what I expect something to sound like. So my monitors are actually they're like especially designed to be like portable. I think they're a collaboration between Vocal and Fender. They made these like portable speakers, which I've got a pair of, which I sometimes bring to sessions, and occasionally I do use them at home, just for kind of double checking mixes.
Did you say between Focal and Fender?
Yeah, they did a collaboration on some monitors. I think I got them at like after they'd been discontinued. I got them very cheap or something, but they're good. Like, and they have like handles, and you can kind of lock them together to transport. And
right on. And then, so you're mixing primarily in your headphones, and you're just training your ears to be able to know what sounds great in the headphones and how to get there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been using these headphones for a few years, so I know exactly what I expect. I know exactly what like the guitar sound on my favorite record sounds like on these headphones. So I know exactly what I expect my sounds to be like on these headphones, and just through experience of listening to my mixes and other stuff, I can hear that they translate well, or like there are specific things that are different to my headphones to other things I could compensate for if I needed to. I mean, I haven't really found I've had to yet, but yeah, I think just knowing what you have is by far the most important thing, monitoring.
Now, you must be wearing your headphones quite a lot of hours during the day. What have you learned about what you like and don't like about having headphones on your head all day long?
I haven't had many problems. I mean, they're always fairly comfy, and I don't listen too loud really. So the ones I have for recording are kind of closed back, much more tightly cupped ones, and those get a bit more uncomfortable to wear for a long period of time. These ones are fairly fine.
And then do you have a preference for the headphone amp itself, so that you know what's getting sent to your headphones sounds better or worse to you?
To be honest, mine's just like the cheapest Behringer one, so I don't really have any.
Okay, cool. No worries. No worries. That's good. That's great though. Let's jump towards the end here, because we've been going a long stretch, but I want to ask you a few questions. One of them is to talk about favorite software tool or something you're excited about. And particularly, I think, you've talked about some of your plugin chain for your mix bus and stuff like that. Maybe get into some of the plugins you've been really enjoying using to get the sound that you're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. So there's this plugin that I love, which is called Lufticus. It's a kind of copy of a Moog style EQ, like the EQP4, whatever it's called, with the airband. It's actually a free plugin online. If you just search Lufticus, Luftikus, it's probably my most used plugin, and it's free. It's just got the most amazing top end EQ, and like I said, the airband.
Now, have you used the Moog 4?
I tried other people's. I haven't tried the hardware one. I've tried the UAD Moog plugin.
And did you like the top end in that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't directly compared them, but I've liked both of them.
Cool.
I also use, and I heard about this through Greg Wells, the Waves Lin MB plugin, which is a linear multiband compressor. In particular, he was talking about the Mika record that he did, and he said when he fit it on this one preset, suddenly it made the whole record sound cohesive. So obviously I tried it because I had the plugin and I loved it, and that's just stayed on my master bus. I think it's called the electro mastering, something like that.
Very cool.
And that's been on my mix bus since then.
What was your did you analyze or take a closer look at what that preset was doing, how it was set up, to get any feeling on like what some of those settings might be?
I adjust the kind of how much it's actually compressing afterwards quite a lot. But for some reason, when it just goes onto that setting, it just sounds, I don't really want to say better, but it just sounds better. It just sounds kind of cohesive, slightly compressed, kind of has a nice kind of, I don't want to say loudness, but has a nice kind of even thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I really love that.
And are you making adjustments, keeping all the different EQ bands linked, or do you unlink them and sort of adjust each EQ band to taste for compression?
Yeah, definitely adjusting them to taste, because it doesn't really come with a set. It comes with set EQ, like each range is set by the preset, but it doesn't compress a certain amount for each one. So I kind of, normally I'm compressing the low end quite a lot and the kind of low mids a little bit to get some clarity, and then maybe the kind of very, very top end, just in case any harshness is there.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. And then what else?
A lot of the Waves plugins is what I mainly use, which I love. Use the Waves Tech, the Vig Tech plugin a lot. Mm-hmm. That's probably one of my most used plugins. 1176 obviously is great. Probably not on the master bus, but it's one of my most used ones. The built-in.
Well, if you're Richard Dodd, you might use the 1176 on the master bus.
I think I have before, maybe once or twice, but it's not a regular. The built-in Logic adaptive limiter plugin is actually amazing. I was using the Waves ones for a long time, so I just thought, the built-in one isn't going to be great. Then one day I tried it, and actually it's been on my mix bus ever since.
I'm sorry, which one was that? The adaptive
limiter.
Oh, the Logic.
Yeah, just the basic Logic one.
Yeah, that is a cool one. I use that all the time because I'm using the Logic plugins when I'm doing YouTube videos and mixing there. So the adaptive limiter is the one I'll grab all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't expecting it to sound so good, but it's just like perfect. It's like subtle. It's not, you never get pumping. It's not like a modern overly compressed sound. It's just like a perfect, even, great kind of, sounds like a record.
Do you want to describe very quickly how it works? What things do you set to have it work for you?
I mean, the only thing that you really set is how much input you're giving it. I mean, you can set other things, I think, like look ahead and stuff like that, which I don't really touch. It just I normally just adjust how much I'm going in, so it's only kind of doing a little bit at the loudest points.
So it's almost like a way to think about the adaptive loudness or adaptive limiter plugin in Logic is that the ceiling is there. You're just gaining your whole mix up into that ceiling until you find the sweet spot and stop. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's like kind of similar to a lot of other like Waves L2 or whatever. So you can see your kind of wave, your kind of loudness level, or your volume level, and then you can see the ceiling and you can adjust where you're hitting the ceiling or how, and normally I'm only doing a little bit.
Cool. Anything else, or is that sort of the last plugin on your mix bus chain?
SSL, Waves SSL compressor gets used pretty most of the time. I really love the, because normally you think for mix bus, kind of low ratios, subtle stuff. Actually, the 10:1 ratio on the SSL, I've discovered, just like barely touching it, I've discovered it's my favorite thing by far on that plugin.
Nice.
The Sound Toys little radiator gets used sometimes for kind of dirtier, rockier things. Especially with the mix knob, you can kind of have it subtly in there. I use that plugin a lot, actually. What else is on there? Probably the Waves Imager, the S1, quite often on there.
And is this kind of the order in which you would put them together on your mix bus?
I have a normal order for the first few that I always use. After that, it's normally just listening and then deciding what I want to fix, if that makes sense. Because for me, it doesn't, I'm not like, I don't have any kind of specific attitude to whether I'll use things in a certain order. It's more like I'm listening and responding to it. So if something needs fixing, then I'll fix it in whatever order that my ears feel like it needs fixing. Or not fixing, but making different. I normally have the top end. I normally have the Lufticus kind of Mark-Daly hue first, because that has an output control, and I can then control how much goes into the Waves multi-band compressor plugin. And then it's normally for some reason I found that controlling the low mids and low end on that multi-band plugin and then going into a pool tech to add low end does something that I really like. It kind of has a very even low end, still kind of warm, but it never gets overwhelming.
Yeah, I like that. It's like you control it first, and then it's like the pull tech is like the bass and the treble on your stereo. You're sort of setting it to taste at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. And then after that, so that is that's 3. That's your first 3 plugins.
Yeah, so I think that's the constant thing that's always there. And then after that, the images pretty regularly there as well. And then
maybe right after the pull tech.
Well, it doesn't really matter too much with the imager because I'm not really using any other spatial effects, so it doesn't matter too much where I put it in.
I think the imager is just doing a mid side. It's just simply boosting the mid or the sides. Is that right? Do you know, or is it more than that?
It's not a doubler or anything. It's just because if you used a doubler or something, you could get kind of weird results.
Yeah, sure.
But it's not doing anything like that. I think it's just a mid side thing. Yeah, I do also sometimes use mid side EQ on the master bus a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very cool, man. Great stuff. All right, so let's cut to a question about the business side of this really quickly.
Yeah.
You have started this business here. You've grown up. You've got great gear. You found a location that works. You described doing sessions with bands, orchestral stuff like that. How are you reaching out, and like what advice do you have to the rock stars about finding this interesting and wide variety of clients to work with? And then what's part of your process about that, as far as, do you have a website that's important to you? Do you have sort of an outreach program? Is it a lot of work, or is it more word of mouth, those kind of things?
I mean, so I'd say about half my clients are people that I already knew through whatever thing, like people who just live near me in my town, or I also occasionally work at a rehearsal studio, so I know some bands through that. One tip I do have is Facebook ads work surprisingly well. I've actually gotten several things through just advertising on Facebook, and it's pretty cheap as well. Like, I've got like a full album project just through advertising on there, and it cost like £5 to do it for like a weekend, and much less than that even. You can do it from like £1 a day, and somehow it's actually worked incredibly well. I've gotten quite a lot of jobs through that.
And do you live in a place where there's lots of other studios that you're sort of rubbing shoulders with, or not so much? And then do you have any tips for the rock stars about how they should think about what kind of Facebook ad to take out?
Well, I live near Brighton, which is quite a big city in England, and there are quite a lot of studios there. I know that just because I do it in the hall, I know that I have the biggest room compared to like any studios that I've seen.
Can you actually say this for me and make it sound a little bit like AC/DC? I've got the biggest halls of them all.
I'm not going to go into Spinal Tap-esque.
All right.
Insult all your British listeners. What was I saying?
Sorry.
Sorry. So yeah, one thing I think I do have compared to other places, which is why I can get some like orchestral stuff, is I have a bigger room than most studios outside of most studios south of London. What are your other parts of the question? Tips for?
Yeah, like what does an ad look like? I mean, the concept of take out a Facebook ad sounds great, but like, what do you put in it? Like, how should the rock stars know what they should say in their ad?
I mean, for me, the most important thing is, because the space I work in is so nice, I just have a really great photo of the space. So they can see like, oh wow, this is a great, beautiful hall. We can make like a drum kit in there, all mic'd up, so they can see they could record in there. And I don't really have much text. I just have like portable recording studio based wherever halls and large rooms available, and then just a great picture. And for me, that's worked quite well.
Very cool. And then did you learn anything about targeting that ad and making sure it only gets shown to certain people in a certain area?
Actually, I haven't done any of that because I think anyone in any age can be in a band who wants to record. And obviously both men and women can. So I didn't actually feel the need to target it, and it's worked great.
Interesting. So it's not a problem that it's going to get shown to somebody in China who, can't come.
Oh, well, I do location.
You do location.
Targeting.
Okay.
So it's like within like 25 miles of where I am or something like that.
Okay, cool. What a great tip, man. I love that. Anything else business-wise? Have you found, you obviously have good verbal skills, you've got good writing skills, you've got good outreach skills through email to, start a podcast and get that going. How did those things play into your ability to, sort of court a new client and then bring them in and do follow through later and all that? Or are you just really right at the beginning of this whole process?
I mean, I am, but I do have some things that I've noticed. I think a good website is really important. I've had quite a few compliments about my website. It's been clear and looks modern and good, which you'd be surprised how many people don't have easy to look at websites. Mm-hmm. One thing I've really noticed about websites, recording studios, is please, for the love of God, write where your recording studio is in the website. Because I'll go on a website for a recording studio, and it doesn't say which town it's in, it doesn't say which area it's in whatsoever. They just presume that only local people will see it so that they'll know where the studio is. But I look at these places and I'm like, is this near me? I have absolutely no idea. Anyway, great website, definitely. Being very kind of easy to email is really helpful. Being fast at replying, being clear and just nice to people helps. Ask other people for help if you need it. It's very important. Mm-hmm. I would say the biggest things when starting out is be nice to people and ask for help if you need it, because you'd be surprised how many people just don't. Not that people are nice, but how many people just don't ask, who don't reach out to other people. Like if I'd say I have one particular skill, is that I'm not afraid to just ask people I like to help me or do stuff with me. Like all this podcast you saw, it's kind of, I think everyone would say it's slightly insane, the guests I've had, considering I've only been doing it for like 4 months.
Yeah, I'd say definitely.
And it's just through asking them. It's not like people presume that I have some kind of insider thing. I didn't know any of them. I just asked them. And same with this recording studio stuff, like, oh, there's this hall near me. I wasn't like meek about introducing myself. Just went in, like, I'm naturally a pretty shy person, but still like go and talk to them, explain what I wanted to do. And then it worked great. And like a lot of the time it won't work great, but that's kind of the price you pay for being able to do good things, is that sometimes it just doesn't work.
That's good advice, man. And of course, I'm hoping a little of your Midas touch will rub off on me and the Rockstars just by having you on the show. So good stuff, man. It's absolutely wonderful having you here, man. I got one more question for you. This is hypothetical, but we take the Wayback Studio machine. I don't know how far way back we need to go for you. Not that long, maybe only about 4 years or something like that. But if you could go back and find younger Hamish and say, listen, dude, first of all, here's how you pronounce your name. It's Hamish. It's not Hamish or Hamish or any of those things. But second of all, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself, which is I know what you want to do. Here's what you need to know. To know, what would you go back and give yourself as advice if you could?
Ask people for help. I think simply. I've gone so much and so many experiences I've had and so many of the pieces of equipment that I've gone through other people. I talk to them, I ask them, like I was just saying, like and I think I've seen the piece of advice somewhere else, like you may think that this person gets asked a lot about this sort of thing, but often they actually don't. And often they have no idea that other people really want to do their job. And so even this, like a local studio, like just through interning, I know loads of people at local studios. I know loads of musical people in my town who a lot of like jobs have come through. and everything. And it's just, and like a lot of the time, like if I wanted to borrow something from someone or wanted a favor from someone, sometimes people said no, but a lot of the time they said yes. And a lot of the best experiences have come from that. Like when I got to go to Abbey Road, like, I asked if I could come along, basically. It's like, if I hadn't have asked, I probably wouldn't have been able to go. But it's just lots of things like that, like asking to intern at studios, asking about a certain piece of gear that someone has, asking if you can borrow it. Obviously, be appropriate and don't bother people, but don't be afraid to be annoying, I think.
What have you learned about the most effective ways to ask, particularly as an intern?
I mean, it really depends on the studio. A lot of studios, there's a lot of very different kind of studios. I mean, a lot of studios are just based around basically one person. So it's just about being friends with that one person and not being irritating to them as an intern, basically. Some studios are much bigger and more kind of bureaucratic. So it's like there's a lot of things they have to worry about to actually get you in a session. It's not as simple as one person saying yes. With asking for anything, I think just being nice and being honest is the most important thing. Like, I was talking to Mark Daniel Nelson, who you should have on the podcast if you haven't already. I was talking about this interview, and I was saying, this seems a bit ridiculous that I'm doing this considering how young I am, how long I've been doing this. And he was like, people don't really care about that. They just care if you're nice to them. It's like, and you have good conversations with people, so people like you, and they're not.
Yeah,
it's really not anything apart from that for most of the time.
I have had Mark Daniel Nelson on the show, and he was great.
Yeah, he's honestly been one of the most supportive people, and like he was someone that, again, he reached out to me, which I was really surprised by because I'd only done like one episode, and he got in touch saying, "I really enjoyed it. Can I come on it, and I'll help you with the podcast and meet other people?" And I'm sure he's had good things come from that. Like he's gotten spoken to old friends and stuff. And it's just about reaching out to people, getting involved with things. I mean, like I was saying, like I want to start doing preamps and stuff like that. Like I'm always looking to do different things, and it's just about being enthusiastic, I think, and open to stuff, but also being skilled enough so that when opportunities come along, that you do the best job possible and just be nice to people. I think is the most important thing.
Well, that's great. Well, Rockstars, I want to encourage you while listening to this show, if you've got questions for me or got questions for Hamish, drop a comment in below and let us know, whether you're on the blog post or whether you're in YouTube. And make sure to go check out Somewhere Sound. It's an incredible podcast, great interviews, and Hamish talks a whole lot less than me. Hamish, how can the Rockstars find you online and go follow you?
I've got my website, my recording, and the podcast, which is somewhere-studios.com. Obviously, a dash, not the word dash. Also got an Instagram, which is Somewhere Recording Studios. If you want to contact me, just do it through the website. My email's on there, and my phone number, but please don't find me. That'd probably be a bit weird and expensive if you're in America. Yeah, just if you contact me any way you'd like to, those are my two main places that I live on the internet.
And if they want to follow the podcast and listen, they go to the studio website?
Well, it's on YouTube. It's also on all the normal podcast places like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. There's an RSS feed on the website, if that's your kind of thing. And it's on YouTube as well, obviously.
And great. Do you want to give a shout out? Now, this may come out after some of these episodes are out, but what are some of the new episodes that are coming up that the Rockstars should be looking out for?
Let me see. Rossum Batman Glitch from Vampire Weekend is coming on. The episode's out very soon. Al Schmidt will be out soon. The Motown Guys will be out soon, which is a very special interview. I'm interviewing Andrew Sheps tomorrow, so that'll be out soon, I'm sure.
Great.
It's been so many great ones.
Make sure you ask Andrew about mixing in headphones. You guys will have a field day.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll need to get a good... This has been helpful, actually, to think about some good questions for him. Had a lot of amazing female guests that need to get out. So obviously there's a lot of great women in the industry too.
Yeah, fantastic.
Those are all the guests that come off the top of my head, but there's loads of amazing ones coming.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much for being on Recording Studio Rockstars with us. It's been a super pleasure hanging out with you. I can't wait to meet you in person. And I look forward to continuing to just, stay connected and grow a friendship.
Well, thank you. It's meant a lot to me to be on it, especially considering I still feel like a 12-year-old.
It's great, man. And once again, Rockstars, the youngest guest to be on the podcast at 21 years old, Hamish Benjamin. Rockstars, that should motivate us all to get our act together. I love it.
Thank you.
All right, Hamish. Thanks so much, man. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
Yeah, talk to you soon.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.